Chapter 744. On the way up the mountain, Rinpoche didn't pay attention to his surroundings. He quietly sat behind the Empress, put his hands on her waist, and listened to her. After meeting Chi Ziding, the Empress finally explained some of the situation. Combined with what Rinpoche knew before, he finally completed the 72 years of Dao's history. Back then, Yuping changed the imperial family's surname to Qi in remembrance of the person who single-handedly destroyed the Han nation and then committed suicide. This matter naturally wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface, and there were some other reasons that weren't known to outsiders. Putting this aside, Yuping changed his name to Qi Peng. Previously, the Han nation poisoned the salt underground in the 60,000 mountains, and the Qi family suffered heavy casualties. Yuping's family only had a 7-year-old child who survived. The child who survived was the Empress's father, Qi Yinghao. Qi Yinghao disappeared 9 years ago, and the Empress succeeded the throne when she was only 16 years old. At that time, Qi Ziding was 41 years old. However, a year before that, something happened to Qi Ziding. At that time, Qi Ziding was the Protector General of the Northeast and the 5th most powerful expert in the world. He was famous for his ruthlessness and bloodthirstiness. Qi Ziding's reputation in the Yun nation could be said to stop children from crying at night due to his outstanding military exploits. Qi Ziding's prestige among the people of Dao wasn't low either. However, both success and failure were due to Xiao He. It was precisely because of his bloodthirsty nature that he was extremely prominent as a general in charge of guarding a region. However, if he were to become the emperor of a nation, with his temperament, it would not take long for Dao to be filled with complaints. In fact, many of the generals and soldiers in the Protectorate of the Northeast were already complaining under the pressure of Qi Ziding. However, Qi Ziding still went his own way and blindly suppressed them. It was under these circumstances that Qi Yinghao chose the Empress as the next emperor. What happened next was what Rinpoche heard. Qi Ziding took advantage of Qi Yinghao's birthday celebration to return to the palace and attempted to assassinate the emperor on the night of the banquet. His legs were chopped off on the spot. Qi Yinghao didn't kill him and only drove him back to the 60,000 mountains. The next year, Qi Yinghao disappeared, and the Empress succeeded the throne as a woman. The Empress spoke to Rinpoche and said faintly, "Actually, my brother treated me well when I was little and would always bring me some interesting things. I think he also has feelings for His Majesty." Rinpoche thought about Qi Ziding's performance just now and whispered behind the Empress. His hands moved from the Empress's waist to her abdomen, as if he was hugging her. The Empress's body stiffened. She sighed softly and did not speak again. It could be seen that even though the Empress was resolute when she spoke just now, her inner feelings were still extremely complicated. As a result, she didn't have much of a reaction to Rinpoche's bold move. After all, Qi Ziding was her only relative. However, her identity and the things that Qi Ziding had done made her unable to let go of certain things. It wasn't convenient for Rinpoche to interrupt such a matter. Before the Empress and her entourage arrived at the village, they saw thousands of people, young and old, waiting outside the village. The stronghold was located in front of Mount Jade Dragon and had a population of 3,000 to 4,000. It was considered the largest stronghold within a few hundred kilometers. After all, it was the ancestral land of the royal family. Even though it was almost destroyed back then, it had developed again after a few decades. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Everyone cupped their fists and greeted the Water Empress. Even the ignorant children imitated the actions of the adults and looked at the Empress curiously. The Empress searched the crowd for a while and found some familiar figures. She had seen them when she came here when she was young. Although a long time had passed, she still remembered a lot of things. However, she didn't say much and just looked at those people one by one. Some of the people in the crowd looked excited, even though the Empress's gaze only lingered on them for a moment. This proved that the Empress still remembered them. The Empress raised her head. The complicated expression that she had when she spoke to Rinpoche just now had disappeared without a trace, and she regained her calmness. Rinpoche felt that this might be the Empress's habitual expression. When she was young, she used this expression to give people a sense of distance and hide the uneasiness and nervousness in her heart at the same time. Now, this expression had become a habit. The Empress said, "There are so many people here, so let's skip the formalities and enter the village." After everyone entered the village, the winged cavalry fell behind while the Empress rode Qi Shui at the front. At the innermost part of the village, there were 3 ordinary-looking stone houses with their doors wide open. The Empress got off her mount and walked into the innermost room. There were many odd-looking stones on the table. "Is this the room that your Majesty used to live in?" Rinpoche sized up the room. It was very high and was about 4 meters tall. There was a wooden bed, a table, a few chairs, and a cabinet inside. Other than these, there was nothing else. The room didn't look like it was occupied, but it was very clean. Qi Sitting must have gotten someone to clean it. "I lived here for half a year." The Empress picked up a monkey-shaped stone from the table and played with it. "I saw this in the mountains and found it interesting, so I picked it up. I didn't expect it to still be here after so many years." "Your Majesty actually picked up a heart-shaped stone." Rinpoche picked up a stone and laughed. In Deo, this kind of heart-shaped stone didn't have the same meaning as it did on Earth. He didn't expect the Empress to have collected one. The Empress had a strange look on her face. She hesitated for a while and said embarrassedly, "When I was young, I thought this looked like a butt." Cough, cough. Rinpoche almost choked on his saliva. Very quickly, Rinpoche discovered something new. He actually found a pair of small hammers in the corner of the wall. The heads of the hammers were made of animal bones and the handles were made of wood. The hammers were probably only held by a 6 or 7-year-old child. He didn't see this pair of hammers because they were blocked by a chair. "This pair of hammers also belongs to your Majesty. My elder brother uses a pair of hammers. I have admired him since I was young and pestered him to teach me a set of hammer techniques," the Empress said. "Unfortunately, I can't use hammers anymore." A voice came from outside the door. The walking stick made a clattering sound as it hit the ground. Qi Sitting wanted to come in with his walking stick, but was stopped by the winged cavalry. His face immediately darkened and said, "Gongjing, you are really bold to even stop me." "Let him in," the Empress said. Since the Empress had spoken, no one stopped him. Gongjing cupped his fists at Qi Sitting and retreated to the side. Qi Sitting entered the house with his walking stick and looked at the Empress. "This house has been looked after for so many years. When I heard that you were coming, I got someone to clean it up. You came back just in time. A few days ago, they hunted a flower camel. You won't be able to eat it in the palace, so you can have a feast tonight." The Empress turned to look at him and said, "Thank you, elder brother. I will get someone to call you when the time comes." Qi Sitting looked at Rinpoche and said, "For Xiaoya's sake, you can come as well." After Qi Sitting left, Rinpoche smiled and said, "Xiaoya." The Empress was a little embarrassed. No one had mentioned this name for many years, and she didn't expect him to hear it now. "It's the meaning of prosperity, right?" The previous emperor was rather scholarly. Rinpoche said. The Empress snorted and didn't say that she was actually called Xiaoya because her teeth were small and the gap between her incisors was big. That was why she got this nickname. If Rinpoche knew about this, she didn't know what he would say. "Are you going to see Mother tomorrow?" Rinpoche's words lingered in his mouth before he said those 2 words. After all, he was a good young man of the new era. Although he was used to calling her Your Majesty, he still wasn't used to calling her mother. "Our marriage has been decided, so it's not inappropriate for you to call me mother," the Empress said when she noticed that Rinpoche had a pause in his speech. Renbochin looked around the house and saw that there was only one bed. He laughed and said, "Previously, your Majesty said that I can't leave your side when we are in the village. This is the only bed here. Are we going to share the same bed tonight?" Chapter 745. In the evening, there was a bonfire party in the village. However, this party was for the other people in the village. The Empress and Renbochin were called to a room by Qi Ziding. Before Renbochin entered the room, he saw someone taking care of the flower camel, or rather, the flower camel. It was a 3-meter-long black scorpion-like creature with a cluster of red and white flowers growing on its back. Renbochin was amazed. After asking, he found out that this flower camel was extremely rare and wasn't very strong. It usually dug a hole in it, and the flowers on its back would give off whims to attract insects and small animals that preyed on them. Sometimes, it would also attract the young of large animals that were playing with butterflies. These small animals were its food. After entering the room, they saw a small table. Qi Ziding was sitting in the innermost seat with his walking stick by his hand. Although he was facing the Empress of Dao, he didn't seem to have any intention of giving way. He just smiled at the Empress. "I know you don't like noise. Let's eat here. They can eat their food, and we can eat ours." As for Renbochin, he simply ignored him. Renbochin originally thought that there would be some trouble during dinner, but he didn't expect Qi Ziding to casually chat with the Empress about her childhood and laugh incessantly at the happy parts. "When you were young, you were most afraid of the dark and loneliness. I didn't expect you to be living alone in such a big and deserted palace for so many years." Qi Ziding laughed heartily. "I got used to it after living here," the Empress said faintly. "And it hasn't been deserted for a long time." These words made Qi Ziding look at Renbochin with a complicated expression. After a while, the processed flower camel was served. The meat was snow-white like crab meat. It tore into shreds and tasted fragrant and delicious when placed in the mouth. Renbochin immediately couldn't control his mouth. Of course, he didn't want to care either. While the other two were talking, he only cared about eating. The wine was fruit wine brewed in the mountains. It was cloudy and poorly made. Fortunately, the fruits in the mountains were sweet, so the wine tasted good. Renbochin saw that the Empress's wine cup was empty from time to time, so he poured a cup for her before pouring another for himself. "Have you found the whereabouts of the late Emperor?" the Empress asked after half a round of wine. There were not many records of the late Emperor. At that time, the people who knew the truth had also left. Until now, the Empress still didn't know why they suddenly left. Or rather, no one knew, but everyone wanted to know. Although Qi Ziding had gone through so many things and had lost his legs, it was impossible for him to return to the 60,000 mountains without searching for the late Emperor. "I searched in that direction for 2 years. I passed through the deepest village and climbed the highest mountain. I found some traces and corpses. Even Cardinal Heaven experts found it difficult to defeat the ferocious beasts we encountered later on. Even I had to be careful. Until I saw those things that weren't human. I had no choice but to retreat. Something that looks like a human but isn't." Renbochin suddenly raised his head. This was the second time he heard this phrase. The first time was from Qing Yun's sword. In other words, Qing Yun's sword's master had entered the 60,000 mountains and returned with serious injuries. He had left a message for Qing Yun's sword to be careful of those things that looked like humans but were not. Back then, these words had caught his attention, so he had always kept them in mind. Qi Ziding's words immediately reminded him. Both of them looked at him in surprise. The Empress asked in a low voice, "What do you know?" "Lin Qiaola." Renbochin answered directly. The Empress understood after hearing this. At the same time, Renbochin was wondering where Lin Qiaola was sleeping now. "Hey! Chi Sitting grinned, revealing an unfathomable smile. Lin Chaola is the little girl that Lin Yuhuan picked up back then, right? No one knows her background, but I've finally figured it out this time. What is it? Ren Baqian and the Empress looked up. It might be something called a chinchilla. Pfft. Ren Baqian almost spat. Chinchilla. The kind that looks like a rabbit and is especially fat. Ha! It doesn't look like it. Tomorrow, I'll buy a box of chinchillas to keep as pets. Both of them looked at him strangely. Ren Baqian quickly waved his hand and said, "It's okay. We also have an animal called a chinchilla, but it shouldn't be the same kind." Ren Baqian thought about it and realized that librarian Lin's name was Lin Yuhuan, which was a rather free and easy name. She must have been an outstanding person back then. Unfortunately, time was like a butcher's knife, and librarian Lin was now a somewhat gloomy old woman. The Empress hesitated for a long time and finally asked the question that she had been hiding in her heart: is father trying to find the path that they took back then? Don't think too much about it. Don't try to find out where grandfather went back then, Chi Sitting advised. Ren Baqian felt a little strange as he watched from the side. Chi Sitting didn't seem to hate Qi Hao. He didn't know why such a thing happened back then. The Empress kept these things in mind and didn't ask anymore. Now was indeed not the time to explore this matter. According to her thinking, Ren Baqian's lifespan was shorter than hers. Perhaps she would only explore these things after his lifespan was up and she had nothing to worry about. They drank until late into the night, and the three of them only put down their glasses after the noise outside had died down. The Empress's face was a little red from the alcohol. This fruit wine didn't have a high alcohol content, but it was very easy to get to the head. I don't know when I'll be able to drink this wine again. Chi Sitting's face was also a little red as he lamented. Do you want to go back to see me on my wedding day? The Empress stopped talking about the Empress and spoke in a calm voice. Asking Chi Sitting to return to Lawn City was a rare invitation. Kuzhai has been thinking about you for so many years. He always felt that you should be sitting in that position. After hearing this, Ren Baqian finally understood why Kuzhai and the Empress didn't have a good relationship. Since I'm out, I won't go back. It's just that I still don't understand why he put you in that position back then, Chi Sitting said. The Empress fell silent again. Ren Baqian interrupted and said, because you only know how to destroy everything. If you want to bring a better life, you need to build and have a compassionate heart. Chi Sitting was about to get angry when he heard this, but then he fell silent. After a while, he sighed and said, perhaps that's the case. Xiaoye is kind. He looked at Ren Baqian with his drunken eyes and said, I let you sit here because of Xiaoye. I don't like you. I don't like you very much. If it were back then, would have killed thousands of people like you. Ren Baqian chuckled and said, I brought crops with greater yields and new seasonings to Dayo. I solved the mining problem at Mount Damo, and the annual production reached more than 1.8 million kilograms. I also improved the methods of smelting steel and forging so that fewer people can make more weapons. I made cement, and we don't need to cut rocks to repair the city walls. I made glass and mirrors. If it weren't for the war, these two things could be exchanged for endless gold and silver in Great Xia and the Yun Nation. I've done all this, and I can do more. I also have a group of students who are useless in the eyes of the Aboriginals, but they know a lot of things. They can't fight, but they can build. They improved machinery that could travel more than 500 kilometers a day without the use of animals. As long as the railway is laid, it will only take 3 days to travel from Lawn City to the Yun Nation. They are also making generators to make Lawn City brightly lit at night. They can also make more things. I brought all of these things with me. If you were the Empress, these things wouldn't have happened. That's why you can only destroy and not build. Chi Sitting was surprised to hear this. He didn't expect so many changes in the outside world. He was a little tempted and wanted to go out and take a look. Do you know that the world's most powerful expert, Li Fu, is in Lan City, waiting for me to make him a machine that can fly? You can't beat him. Therefore, being able to build is also a kind of power, and it's even more powerful than destroying, Renbochin said. Chapter 746. After returning to the stone house, Renbochin listened to the Empress's breathing on the bed and felt a little restless. Apart from the time when he was injured and the two of them were sleeping in the wilderness, even the hotel suites were separated by a mile and a mile. It was rare for them to be so close. "Your Majesty," he called out softly. "What's the matter?" The Empress's voice came from the bed. "I just suddenly thought of it. Ru Axayan and Lin Chaola have been in the palace for a long time, so they don't seem to know much about gender. However, Your Majesty is very polite and guarded against it. Who taught you this?" Renbochin looked puzzled and had a mischievous smile on his face. "Isn't it normal?" the Empress asked. Renbochin stroked his chin and said, "It's normal, but I feel that. Could it be that Your Majesty has read pornographic novels before?" "What's a pornographic book?" The Empress was stunned and didn't know how to react. "Those books that describe men and women." Renbochin chuckled. Crack! Renbochin heard the sound of the bed board cracking. Bang! The wooden pillow was thrown directly at Renbochin by the Empress. It hit the area between Renbochin's legs and bounced off. Renbochin broke out in a cold sweat. "Calm down, Your Majesty, calm down. I was just asking casually." The Empress immediately sat up from the bed. Her eyes shone brightly in the darkness as she said in an unfriendly tone, "How do you know that Xanjie and Lin Chaola don't understand the matters between men and women?" Renbochin was shocked and almost bit his tongue. He had wanted to tease her a little, but in the end, he had buried a mine for himself. And nuclear landmines. Renbochin's brain was working very fast. He felt that his brain was working faster than an i9 processor. No matter how he thought about it, he felt that this matter couldn't be avoided. After all, he had already said it, so he could only avoid the important point and dwell on the trivial. Because the two of them don't really avoid people when they change their clothes. In any case, he couldn't tell anyone about the electric shock. The electric shock was nothing, but Xanjie's reaction made him feel exceptionally guilty. "Have you seen it before?" the Empress asked coldly. "When Her Majesty returned to Earth, she threw the two of them to me. I threw them clothes, but they changed on the spot and gave me a fright." Renbochin said honestly. "You really can't blame me for this. I was also shocked at the time." What he said was true. If the Empress asked, he could also confirm it. In any case, he didn't do anything. The Empress groaned softly, lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. Renbochin turned around, sat up, and looked at the Empress on the bed. He didn't say anything and just looked at her. After a long time, the Empress couldn't take it anymore. She looked at him from the corner of her eyes and asked, "What are you looking at?" "I just want to take a look. I like it." Renbochin replied softly. "I can't sleep with you looking at me like that." The Empress didn't know if she was happy or unhappy to be stared at like this. She felt uncomfortable all over, but when she heard those words, she didn't hate it. "Since you can't sleep, let's talk." Renbochin's mouth twitched and almost suggested truth or dare. It wasn't easy for him to dispel this suicidal idea. "Haven't you said enough during the day?" the Empress asked. "During the day, we talk about the day, and at night, we talk about the night. It's not the same." Of course it was different. A man and a woman were alone in a room at night. How could they speak the same words as they did during the day? The Empress felt uncomfortable being stared at by him and asked helplessly, "What do you want to say? How many children do you like to have, Your Majesty?" Renbachian's words almost made the Empress fly into a rage out of humiliation. "Do you want to grant amnesty to the world during your wedding?" Renbachian immediately changed the topic after teasing her. The Aboriginals were very strange. For example, cases of rape on Earth were extremely rare. Logically speaking, such cases should be common in a world with a high level of martial arts. In fact, there were many such cases in Great Xia and the Yun Nation. However, it was extremely rare among the Aboriginals. Just like in the brothels in Lawn City, where they indulged in debauchery, it was limited to touching and hugging. It was rare for them to spend the night and do indescribable things. It seemed that the Aboriginals had a much lower desire in this aspect than ordinary people. The fertility rate of the Aboriginals was low. In addition to the difficulty of giving birth due to their strong bodies, this was also a very important factor. Furthermore, there was almost no theft among the Aboriginals. The most common crime of the Aboriginals was to cause serious injury or death in fights. Generally, the punishment for a fight was 3 whips. The barbed tail whips would immediately make things ugly. However, if they caused serious injury or death, they would be sentenced to 6 to 5 years in prison. If they deliberately killed someone, the punishment would range from 10 years to beheading, depending on the severity of the situation. However, such cases were extremely rare. The Aboriginals were ferocious to outsiders, but they generally followed their own set of moral standards to their own people. The Empress felt a little strange after hearing Renbachian's words and asked, "Why?" "Because it's a festive occasion. Shouldn't the whole world celebrate together on such a joyous occasion? Won't the victims blame me for being unfair?" The Empress shook her head. Renbachian shrugged his shoulders. He was just casually saying it. "Will I be a prince after the wedding?" Renbachian asked again with a smile. "Of course, my husband will be a prince," the Empress said as a matter of course. "What's the benefit of being a prince? Marrying me is the greatest benefit." A smile appeared on the Empress's face. She recalled the time when Renbachian asked her to marry him. Great Elder Shurqing was furious. He had never seen such a shameless person. Renbachian laughed. This was indeed the greatest benefit. In addition to this benefit, there is also responsibility. The heavy burden of the Aboriginals is on my shoulders, and it is on your shoulders as well. Liking a person means liking everything about her, including all her strengths, her shortcomings, her responsibilities, and her burdens. This was said by a famous person, Renbachian said softly. Even I'm moved. What's this person's name? It sounds like he's a responsible person. Renbachian. The Empress wanted to laugh. He was indeed shameless again. It's a little cold in the mountains at night. Renbachian said with his arms crossed. The Empress couldn't be bothered with him. Even if it was really cold, he wouldn't feel anything with his strength. Seeing that the Empress was ignoring him, Renbachian could only lie on the ground and look at the roof with his hands behind his head. He suddenly thought of something and said, "Your Majesty, after the wedding, we still have to hold a wedding on Earth." He originally wanted to hold a thank you banquet, but after thinking about it carefully, if he only held a thank you banquet, his family would ask him where the wedding was held and where his family was. What would he say? What would it look like if he didn't let his family know about the wedding? However, he couldn't possibly say that his family was on another planet. Okay. The Empress replied softly. Even though she didn't like this, she let Renbachian do as he pleased. Even though she was the Empress, she was always considerate of Renbachian. Renbachian had always felt that this was extremely rare and precious. There should be at least some people from her family at the wedding, right? Renbachian imagined bringing along dozens of fierce-looking winged cavalry warriors. He reckoned that most people wouldn't dare to enter that place. However, if there wasn't a single person, it would be too unseemly and attract gossip. It wouldn't matter to him, but his parents would most likely grumble about him. Should he let Yongsan pretend to be from her family? This could be studied. Renbachien thought about the wedding on earth while listening to the Empress's breathing. He lay on the ground and rolled, continued rolling, and rolling again. The Empress lay on the bed and listened to Renbachien's breathing. At the same time, she was thinking about the wedding. No matter what kind of woman she was, the wedding was the most important thing. As a result, Renbachien kept rolling on the ground. The Empress reached out to touch him and remembered that she had thrown the pillow away. There was nothing on the bed except for that wooden pillow. She regretted throwing the pillow away so early. "What are you doing?" The Empress couldn't bear it anymore and asked. "I'm tossing and turning restlessly." Renbachien replied confidently. "I can't sleep thinking about my wedding with your majesty and growing old together." The anger that the Empress had just brewed dissipated again. She continued to lie on the bed and stare blankly at the ceiling. Then, she kept feeling uncomfortable lying down and wanted to turn over. The Empress felt that she had been infected by him. Chapter 747. The next morning, Renbachien went out while yawning. He was about to go to bed, but the Empress kept tossing and turning on the bed, causing him to be unable to fall asleep. If it weren't for his strength, he would probably have dark circles under his eyes this morning. He went out while yawning. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan entered the room with a basin while sneaking glances at him. He knew without asking that they were overthinking things. Renbachien walked a few steps in the village and heard shouts coming from afar. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw hundreds of strong men practicing martial arts in an open space. Their movements were very familiar, the fist of death. Qi sitting leaned on his walking stick and scolded, "Haven't you had breakfast? All of you are so weak. If you were like this under my command back then, I would have beheaded you long ago." As he scolded, he used his walking stick to pick up a few stones and hit them on their heads. "If you continue to be so weak, I will beat you to death first so that you don't look like an eyesore." Renbachien felt that Qi sitting was indirectly scolding them. Even the weakest of them were much better than him. Forget it, he wouldn't lower himself to his level. After watching from afar for a while, he strolled back to have breakfast. Breakfast was a soup of meat and wild vegetables. It had a strong aroma that whetted one's appetite. However, the wild vegetables tasted a little bitter and fragrant. It was somewhat similar to a type of wild vegetable that was eaten in the Northeast in early May every year, thorn-tender shoots. Next time, try making some bird's mayonnaise or frying it with flour. "It should taste good," Renbachien said vaguely as he swallowed the meat soup. "Do it if you want. The imperial kitchen doesn't know how to," the Empress said while holding a bowl. The Empress's manners were much better than his, but she ate faster than him. Her wooden bowl was filled to the brim, and she tilted her head and poured all the soup into it. Her actions were pleasing to the eye. Renbachien figured out the reason for this. Good looks were good in everything. No matter which world it was, looks were the most important. Just look at Zhuge Liang and Pang Tong. Zhuge Liang was 8 feet tall, had a jade-like face, wore a silk scarf on his head, and wore a crane cloak. He looked like an immortal. Looking at Pang Tong again, he had thick eyebrows and a raised nose, a black face with a short beard, and a strange face. The Crouching Dragon and Phoenix Jr. were comparable in terms of talent, but the treatment they received was completely different. If Pang Tong were to change his appearance to that of Zhuge Liang, even if he was arrogant, others would think that he was only arrogant because he was talented. Sunlight shone in through the window, sprinkling a layer of vibrant sunshine in the room. The stone house was very tall, but it was not big. They could touch the bed just by turning around. It was just right for the two of them. It was much more comfortable than the empty bedroom. After breakfast, there was already someone waiting outside. It was a well-dressed man in his 30s. When he saw the Empress, he was a little perturbed and stammered, "Your Majesty, Commander Chi asked me to bring you up the mountain. He said that your Majesty hasn't been there for a long time and it's easy for you to get lost." "Commander. Brother, do you still hold a position in the village?" the Empress asked pleasantly. Yesterday afternoon, the two of them had been at loggerheads the moment they met, but after dinner, things had eased up quite a bit. "Commander Chi is the leader of the hunting team," the man said with a simple and honest face. "He can't stay idle." The Empress smiled, and the man was stunned. "Let's go." The cemetery of the Chi family wasn't at the back of the village, but on Mount Yulong, where the dragon's head was. Renbocchen didn't know anything about geomancy and didn't know what would happen if the cemetery was placed on the dragon's head. However, after so many years, there was an emperor. It seemed that the geomancy here wasn't bad. Along the way, Renbocchen picked a lot of white flowers and wove them into a wreath. "What are you doing?" The Empress saw that he had wove a bunch of flowers into a wreath and didn't understand. "This is the first time I'm meeting my mother-in-law, so I need some gifts. I don't know what she likes, but I don't think she hates flowers, right?" Renbocchen raised his head and smiled. He wasn't paying attention, and his hand was pricked again. However, his skin was rough now, so he didn't care. When the Empress looked at him, her gaze was gentle. "You are very considerate. I'm a polite person." Renbocchen laughed. After climbing up Mount Yulong, they walked along a small path to the top of the dragon's head. In front of them was an open space. From here, they could overlook the entire front, including the Yu family village, the surrounding terrain, and the overlapping mountain ranges in the distance. The scenery was boundless. At a glance, they couldn't tell how many graves there were. Under each pile of stones was evidence of the existence of a person. Some seemed to be frequented, and the weeds in the vicinity were pulled out cleanly. Some were untended and had long been buried by weeds. One wouldn't be able to see them if they didn't step on them. The Empress's mother's grave was in a corner. Even though she was the Empress, it was only one size bigger than an ordinary grave. The stones were of better quality, and they were all hand-picked white stones. The surroundings were very clean, and it seemed like it was cleaned frequently. "All of you can leave." The Empress waved at the people behind her and chased them away. Then, she said to Renbocchen, "Come with me." "It seems that my mother-in-law likes white," Renbocchen said as he looked at the pile of white stones in the grave. "I haven't seen it before, but they said that my mother likes white." The Empress nodded. "In that case, I've chosen the right flowers." Renbocchen laughed. The wreath in his hand was made of white flowers. The Empress ignored him, stood in front of the grave, and said softly, "I've come to see you again. I've grown up." After saying this, the Empress paused for a moment before pulling Renbocchen to her side and saying, "It's him. In a few months, I'll be getting married to him. He's not from Dayo, Great Xia, the Yun nation, or the Qin nation. I don't think you care about this." "Hello, mother-in-law," Renbocchen said respectfully as he placed the wreath on the stones. "He's a little cunning, lazy, afraid of suffering, afraid of being tired, and glib. He has many shortcomings, but I quite like him. With him around, I won't be lonely." Renbocchen couldn't help but look at the Empress. "Is this how you think of me? I don't know if you feel lonely. However, this is the ancestral grave. With so many people accompanying you, it must be quite lively," the Empress said as she looked at the graves around her. "That brother of mine. Forget it, let's not talk about him. You can see him every day. As for me, after being the Empress for a few years, I'm actually very bored. Every day, I stay in the palace, deal with those matters, or just stare blankly. This can't be helped. Father is gone, and I don't know where he went. He must be looking for the late emperor. With so many Aboriginal commoners, someone has to take care of them and bear the responsibility. If I have a child after my marriage, I would like to go out and take a look when he grows up. I heard this saying a few days ago, and I like it. The world is so big, and I want to see it. Mother, do you think we should go and take a look? The person who said this is an ordinary person. He can put down everything and take a look, but as the Empress, I can't do that. The Empress had a lot to say. After talking to the grave for a long time, she simply sat on the ground and asked, "Do you drink wine? I heard that you like it, so I brought wine this time." Rinpoche immediately went to the winged cavalry and brought a few bottles of wine. He handed one to the Empress and opened another bottle in front of the grave. Chapter 748. The Empress sat in front of the grave for an entire day from morning to night with wine bottles strewn all over the ground. He even knows how to sing. It's quite nice. The Empress threw the wine bottle aside and laughed as she suddenly thought of something. Rinpoche looked at the Empress and wondered if she had drunk too much. Did she really drink too much? Not only did she drink in front of the grave, but she also wanted to sing. Should she go to the disco? After drinking a box of sorghum liquor, even the Empress couldn't help but get drunk. She immediately said modestly, "I only sang pomp and circumstance well. It would be even better if there was an arrow." The Empress immediately stopped talking. After sitting there in a daze for a long time, she said dully, "I have said so much to you, but you didn't even reply to me. It's boring to talk alone, and you talk to yourself like a fool. Forget it, I'm leaving. I'll come back to see you on my way back." After the Empress finished speaking, a gust of wind blew, causing the nearby branches and weeds to rustle. "I don't understand what you are saying either. Anyway, I'm leaving, and you don't have to send me off." The Empress waved her hand and stood up from the ground, swaying a little. Rinpoche put his arm around her waist, and she didn't object, allowing him to do so. "Goodbye, mother-in-law." Rinpoche even politely nodded at the grave to bid farewell. After walking for about 100 meters, there were winged cavalry warriors waiting there. However, all of them had bumps on their faces and were beyond recognition. "Did you guys dig out a beehive?" Rinpoche asked subconsciously. In the end, this group of people took out 2 beehives reluctantly and said, "Sir Ren, there are 2 beehives from Golden Ring Peak nearby. This honey isn't only fragrant but also has all kinds of miraculous effects. It makes people feel like they are in the clouds and forget about the troubles of time. So precious." Rinpoche was surprised. Looking at their reluctance, he knew that this was definitely something good. It's mainly because it's rare. This thing is rare even in the periphery of the 60,000 mountains, and we only encountered 2 here, one of the winged cavalry warriors said. Looking at the bumps on their faces, these bees were pretty impressive to be able to sting a winged cavalry warrior like this. "This is for Her Majesty." Everyone brought over 2 beehives that were half the size of a human. "It's not good for me to take your things. How about this, each of you will be rewarded with silver." The Empress was halfway through her sentence. She didn't even know how much money was left in the treasury. Rinpoche immediately replied, "Everyone will be rewarded with 300 taels of silver. Everyone at the foot of the mountain will get 100 taels." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Everyone was overjoyed. One had to know that a winged cavalry warrior's salary was only 15 taels of silver. 300 taels of silver was almost 2 years of their salary. However, in the Yun Nation, an Earthwill expert's annual salary was at least 2,000 to 3,000 taels. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche. Each of the 200 winged cavalry warriors on the mountain would receive 300 taels of silver. Each of the 400 winged cavalry warriors at the foot of the mountain would receive 100 taels of silver. This would be a total of 10,000 taels of silver. The annual expenses of the palace, together with the salaries of the palace guards and palace maids, were only about 60,000 taels of silver. These 10,000 taels of silver made her heart ache. On their way down the mountain, the Empress asked, "How much silver does the imperial treasury have?" Renbochin knew more about this than the Empress. The Empress almost never asked about it. Including the sale of spices and mirrors, there are 630,000 taels of silver in the imperial treasury. There are also some treasures given by the ministers during the birthday celebration last year, Renbochin whispered. The Empress blinked her eyes and asked in surprise, "So much?" Previously, there were only tens of thousands of taels of silver in the imperial treasury. She didn't expect there to be more than 600,000 taels of silver, which surprised her. This was equivalent to 10% of the national treasury's annual income. This is part of the purchase of medicinal herbs. Renbochin continued, "Now that the families of the officials in Lan City are almost out of money, I'm afraid that their income will drop in the second half of the year. However, Your Majesty has always allocated funds from the imperial treasury to purchase weapons in the Yun nation. Now that the money has been saved, there will naturally be a surplus. At the end of the year, the gold mine will also receive more than 100,000 taels of silver." The Empress nodded and said, "That's true. This is all thanks to you." Knowing that there was so much money in the imperial treasury, the Empress didn't care about the 10,000 taels of silver that Renbochin had thrown out just now. It was already dark by the time they went down the mountain. The village was pitch black except for a few torches near the gate and a few stone houses in the innermost part of the village. For the villages in the mountains, lighting up was never an easy task. The animal oil that could be used to light the torches was also very precious to them. Qi Ziding had already prepared a meal for them. After eating, Renbochin and the Empress extinguished the light and lay down in the room. One of them was still on the bed and the other on the floor. Not long after, Renbochin heard the Empress's breathing stabilize. It seemed like she was fast asleep. She didn't sleep much last night, but it wasn't a big deal for her. However, after speaking in front of the grave for the entire day, the Empress had exhausted a lot of her mental energy. After a day, she was a little tired. Renbochin was originally very sleepy, but he couldn't fall asleep after lying down. He simply got up from the floor and sat at the table. He supported his chin with one hand and looked at the Empress's silhouette in the dark. Although there was only a little moonlight shining in from outside, with the improvement of his strength, he could see more clearly than ordinary people in the dim light. He could even see the Empress's appearance and the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Sure enough, good-looking people looked good when they slept. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but the Empress was originally a beauty. He wanted to climb into bed, but was afraid of being kicked off. Renbochin's thoughts ran wild. He wanted to laugh when he thought of the Empress talking about family matters in front of the grave during the day. He felt that the Empress was quite cute when she looked like that. On the bed, the Empress felt uncomfortable being stared at by Renbochin. In fact, she had already woken up when he got up. However, she wanted to see what he was going to do, so she didn't say anything. In the end, he sat in front of the table and kept looking at her. As he looked at her, he even laughed. She didn't know what he was thinking about. Now that the Empress wanted to open her eyes, it wasn't appropriate, so she simply continued to pretend to be asleep. There was still some sweetness in her heart. After a while, she gradually let go and allowed Renbochin to look at her as she fell asleep. The next day, Renbochin went out yawning again. Seeing him like that, the Empress felt that he deserved it. Fortunately, there wasn't much to do today. During the day, the Empress and Qi Ziding chatted, and Renbochin found a place to catch up on his sleep. Renbochin didn't know how long he had slept, but he was slapped awake by someone. At that time, Renbochin was sleeping when someone slapped his face and nose. Then, he found someone else beside him. Lin Xiaola. He didn't know where she slept all day, but she had come out of nowhere today. She was lying on her back drooling, holding a bag of sweets in one hand, and slapping him with the other. Renbochin covered his face as he got up from the ground. He could smell the smell of alcoholic chocolate coming from Lin Xiaola's mouth. He also saw the wrappers scattered on the ground. Looking at her face, which was a little red, Renbochin felt that she might have drunk too much. She had drunk too much alcoholic chocolate. She couldn't drink alcohol. Not at all. Renbochin opened the bag and found that all the alcoholic chocolate was gone. He casually threw the bag back into her hands. He wanted to give her a kick, but he didn't kick her when he saw her acting like a little girl. Renbochin sighed and felt that he was quite unlucky to have gotten into trouble while he was sleeping. He walked out to stretch and saw that the Empress and Qi were still sitting there. The sun was setting, but the two of them were still sitting there talking about something. Looking at this scene, one couldn't tell that one was the current Empress, and the other was said to be a bloodthirsty murderer who assassinated the previous emperor for the throne. This scene was too harmonious. Although the two of them were close relatives and hadn't seen each other for 10 years, it was normal for them to talk a lot. Now, Renbochin understood that the Empress didn't actually talk a lot. She started to talk more when she was with him. Now, looking at her and Qi sitting in front of the grave. Chapter 749. At night, a small bowl of amber-colored viscous liquid was placed in front of Renbochin. It emitted a tempting and sweet fragrance. The sweet scent of flowers filled the entire house. It could even be smelled from outside the house, making people salivate. When the scent reached the nose, it was as if it could reach the brain. It made people feel light all over and swept away any fatigue. It was a nest of honey from the golden ring bees. 2 honeycombs, which were half the size of a human, were cut open and filled a jar of this honey. A bowl of this honey was worth thousands of gold taels in the Yun nation, not to mention this jar. After careful calculation, Renbochin's 100,000 taels of silver were well spent, and he even gained the favor of many winged cavalry warriors. The two of them sat quietly at the table with a wooden bowl in front of them. Both of them stared at the bowls in front of them as if they were doing some kind of pre-meal ritual. Renbochin remembered someone saying that life should have a sense of ritual and that ordinary life would feel different. However, the difference was that the Empress had half a bowl of honey while he only had half a bowl. Although this honey was precious, he couldn't eat too much with his current strength. "Can you eat it?" the Empress asked without looking up. If Renbochin hadn't stopped her, she wouldn't have been able to hold back. This was her favorite dessert. If she had to choose between Renbochin and dessert, she might choose him after some hesitation. If she had to choose between Tong Zhenye or any other big shots in the imperial court and dessert, she would choose dessert without a second thought. She had already made a huge concession by enduring for so long. "Let's eat." As soon as Renbochin finished speaking, the Empress had already taken a finger-sized piece of chocolate honeycomb and put it into her mouth. Accompanied by the crisp sound of chewing, she closed her eyes and revealed an intoxicated look. Although Renbochin was also very greedy, sweets weren't as attractive to him as they were to the Empress. He was able to watch the Empress eat with a smile and then mimic her actions. The honeycomb was a honeycomb used to extract honey. It was broken into small pieces by the people in the imperial kitchen and put into the mouth with honey. It was extremely rich and filled with various fragrances of flowers that filled the entire taste buds. Renbochin tasted it carefully and could actually detect the fragrance of several flowers. Furthermore, the honey was sweet but not greasy. The aroma filled his mouth and made him feel as though he was tasting the taste of spring. The honeycomb, on the other hand, was like a biscuit. It was slightly crispy and fragrant. It was a perfect match with honey. Renbochin couldn't help but close his eyes and carefully savor the feeling in his mouth. Even after swallowing, the fragrance of the flowers and honey lingered in his mouth for a long time. It was as if the honey was still in his mouth, but it lacked the crispness of the honeycomb. However, he felt that it was slightly imperfect. As the second mouthful of honey entered his mouth, Renbochin felt that the light feeling he had when he first smelled the honey was even more obvious. His body seemed to have become lighter. When more than half of the honey in the bowl was gone, Renbochin felt as though he had become an immortal. He felt as though he could fly at any time. An indescribable sense of comfort and excitement stimulated his brain in waves. He seemed to hear the sound of music in his ears. It was 1,000 times better than the sound of his arrow. It was like the sound of an immortal. Renbochin shook his head to wake himself up. He looked up at the Empress and saw that the wooden bowl in his hand had been emptied. The Empress's face was flushed and her eyes looked a little hazy as if she was drunk. "Your Majesty, you are drunk from the honey," Renbochin teased. "Ugh!" The Empress hiccuped for the first time. Her mouth was filled with the fragrance of honey and flowers. It made people want to kiss her and see if her red lips were as sweet and fragrant. "This honey tastes a little strange. It feels like I have drunk alcohol." The Empress wanted to sober herself up, but she couldn't. Waves of pleasure that came from an unknown source attacked her brain, causing her to groan softly. This groan sounded extremely tempting to Renbochin's ears. However, he still focused his attention on the bowl in front of him. "It's extremely delicious. If this was placed on Earth, I wonder how many people would fight over it." Renbochin gave a thumbs up. He had eaten the legendary bear paw when he was young. It was the fattest right paw, and it was said that it was brought over by his father's classmate from the greater Shingon Mountains. However, compared to this honey, it wasn't worth comparing at all. Renbochin used the last piece of beehive to carefully scoop up the remaining honey in the wooden bowl. Every strand of honey was smeared on the beehive before Renbochin put the beehive into his mouth with satisfaction. After eating it, he still felt like it wasn't enough. However, he was satisfied when he thought of the jar of honey left. However, he finally understood why the Empress seemed to be drunk. His head was also dizzy, and everything he saw began to have double shadows. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but the bowl on the table suddenly moved to the side. It was as if the bowl had 2 legs and was trying to escape. It actually wants to escape. "Ha, I want to see what's up to this." Renbochin laughed heartily. Seeing that the bowl was about to jump off the table, he suddenly stretched out his hands, but the feeling of touching the bowl didn't appear at all. He grabbed empty air. Renbochin was stunned. He carefully looked at the table and found that the bowl was actually still in its original position as if it had never been moved. Renbochin didn't believe it and lifted the bowl, but found nothing underneath it. "That's strange." Renbochin was a little puzzled. He looked up at the Empress and couldn't take his eyes off her. He saw the Empress sitting there in a daze looking at him. Her pretty face was like jade, and her flame-like red lips were especially attractive. This made his adrenaline surge. In addition, the celestial music that came to his ears kept brewing his emotions. An inexplicable impulse surged into his body. "Your Majesty, huh?" The Empress's reaction seemed to be a little slow, but Renbochin couldn't care less about such things. Renbochin walked around the table, held the Empress's face, and said, "Your Majesty must be very sweet now." After finishing his sentence, he didn't wait for the Empress to reply and lowered his head. "It's indeed very sweet," Renbochin thought to himself. This was a soul-stirring kiss that lasted until the end of time. Renbochin couldn't bear to leave the Empress's red lips, and her hands were placed on his waist. This made it even more difficult for him to control himself. Then, he blacked out. When he woke up again, he found himself on the bed and holding a ball of softness under his palm. Pinch. Pinch. Pinch again. The sweet smell of her breath gently blew against his face. Renbochin saw the Empress beside him with the help of the dim light in the room. A red muslin was hanging at the corner of the bed. Her white inner garment was half undone, revealing a touch of fullness. Renbochin carefully moved his hand away and took a look. It was as if he was looking at an exquisite jade sculpture, which made his heart beat like a flame. Oh! The Empress snorted softly and turned her body. Renbochin was immediately drenched from head to toe with a basin of ice water. He jumped off the bed as if he had seen a ghost, lay on the ground, and pretended to be asleep. Will the Empress fly into a rage out of humiliation when she wakes up? I don't know. I don't know anything. What exactly happened at that time? I only remember kissing the Empress. What happened after that? Why can't I remember anything? Fake wine is harmful, and fake honey is going to kill. Damn it, there's something wrong with this honey. Why didn't I realize it at that time? It shouldn't be. Such a strong reaction, that tide-like pleasure and excitement, that light feeling, that celestial music. How is this honey? Renbochin's mind was spinning frantically. That feeling made him feel that it was something that was strictly forbidden on Earth. He should have realized it earlier. However, the excitement brought about by the honey made him completely forget about it. The Empress turned over on the bed, causing him to hold his breath as his heart thumped wildly. He jumped off the bed, but didn't notice that the Empress's neck and ears were completely red. Her half-undone inner garment revealed her skin, which was dyed rosy. Chapter 750. It was a torturous night for Renbochin. He obviously couldn't sleep, but he didn't dare to move. He even had to breathe softly so as not to wake the Empress. He was thinking about the scene he saw and the lingering sensation on his hand. He was also worried that the Empress would fly into a rage out of humiliation when she woke up. Their marriage had already been decided and they had even talked about it in front of the Empress's mother's grave. However, the Empress was extremely shy in this regard. It was difficult for them to make much progress before the wedding. Renbochin was already aware of this. Anyway, there were only a few months left, so he wasn't in a hurry. He didn't expect such a situation to occur because of such a small bowl of fake honey. On the contrary, it made him feel a little apprehensive. Although the harvest was big enough, the danger was greater than the harvest. Marx once said that it would dare to commit any crime for 300% profit, even at the risk of being hanged. However, Renbochin felt that it would be too unjust if he was buried by the angry Empress after just holding her hand once, twice, thrice. Therefore, the best choice now was to pretend to be dead. After an unknown period of time, Renbochin shut his eyes tightly and heard a soft groan from the bed, followed by the sound of the Empress getting up. The Empress sat there for a moment and put on her clothes. Renbochin's mind gradually outlined the details of the Empress's movements. Then, the Empress kicked Renbochin awake. Oh. It hurts. Renbochin said with sleepy eyes. What happened last night? The Empress asked faintly. What happened? I don't know. Renbochin looked at the Empress blankly. At this time, the Empress had put on her white undergarments and red veil. She was staring at him with flickering eyes. What happened? Renbochin asked. Nothing. The Empress shifted her gaze away and appeared at the door in a flash. Seeing the Empress's actions, Renbochin secretly heaved a sigh of relief and gave himself a thumbs up. She was indeed worthy of being the best actor. The Empress opened the door with her eyes flickering. She felt tiny beads of sweat on her back. With her strength, this was simply impossible. Your Majesty, why is your face a little red? Qin Yuan asked curiously from the side while carrying a wooden basin. The Empress glared at her fiercely, but her voice didn't reveal any clues. She casually asked, "Your face is red." Qin Yuan was kicked by Hong Wuan. She lowered her head and said, "I saw wrongly." The morning sun shone on His Majesty's face, making it look slightly red. "What happened to Her Majesty?" Ren Baqian asked as he walked out of the room. "I'm fine." The Empress waved her hand and got them to help her wash up. "If Your Majesty's face is a little redder, I'm sure it will look very good." Ren Baqian laughed. Although he had suffered for a whole night, he was in high spirits, mainly because of the effects of the honey. Just a little bit of it could make a person feel 100 times more energetic. This honey had a very strong stimulant effect. However, if it was just a little more, the situation from last night would occur. Excitement, pleasure, and all kinds of hallucinations, even fragments. After breakfast, the group prepared to leave. However, only 300 of the winged cavalry warriors would leave with the Empress. The other 300 would head in other directions to various villages. Including Gongjing, they still had a mission from the Empress: replenish the winged cavalry. This wasn't just to replenish the winged cavalry. This time, the Empress was going to expand the winged cavalry to 4,000 people. After all, Dao's food production had greatly increased, and the Yun nation was about to fall into their hands. No matter how big the appetite of the winged cavalry warriors was, they could now raise more. The direction that the Empress and Ren Baqian were heading in was considered a barren and treacherous forest in the 60,000 mountains. There were almost no villages, so they simply split into two groups. Ren Baqian and the Empress would go to the place that Librarian Lin had mentioned, while the other 300 people would go to the depths of the 60,000 mountains under Gong Zhang's lead to recruit Kismet Heaven experts. While everyone was packing, Ren Baqian saw that the people from the Imperial Kitchen had actually put the jar of honey on the backs of their mounts. He quickly said, "You don't have to bring this." "Sir, the honey of the golden ring bee is very precious. It would be a pity to throw it away," the people from the Imperial Kitchen said. Ren Baqian thought about it. This honey was indeed good stuff, but he didn't know if it would be addictive. Otherwise, it would be excellent to drink some during the bridal chamber. After all, we have to walk on the mountain road and can easily break it. I'll leave it here and take it when I come back. At this time, he was glad that he had hidden this from the Empress. Otherwise, he didn't know what her reaction would be. As for using it during the bridal chamber, it didn't matter. Qi Ziding had already heard about this from the Empress, so he wasn't surprised to see everyone ready to set off. Instead, he sent them off to the front of the village. Accompanying him was a burly man in his 50s. There was a claw mark on his neck that tore open his skin, but he was lucky to be alive. However, the sound of his breathing was different from that of an ordinary person. It seemed that his trachea had been injured when he was clawed by the beast. This man carried a bow that was half the height of an average person on his back and led a strange-looking mount. It had antlers and a dog's face, but it had the body of a tiger. Its fur was covered with camouflage-like stripes, and it had a dog's tail. His name is Yixing, and he has been to the most places in the village besides me. He has also been to the place that you want to go and can lead the way for you. I won't be accompanying you. In any case, that place isn't very dangerous for you, and you still have to come back when you return. The Empress sat on Qi Shui's back and nodded. There's no need to send me off. I'll be back in a few days. Then, she ordered everyone, set off. Everyone, who was already prepared, immediately set off. For the rest of the journey, Ren Baqian spent less time with the Empress and would read a book when he had nothing to do. On the one hand, he felt guilty. On the other hand, he wanted to read the Yang boosting technique again so that he could memorize all the details. According to Librarian Lin, this technique was easy to understand, and the most difficult part was to nurture the human furnace. However, Renbochin didn't dare to let his guard down. They traveled in the southwest direction for 7 days. This section of the road was 100 times more difficult than before. There were deep mountains, dangerous rivers, and strange rocks everywhere. The 60,000 mountains was already a barren land, but this area was even more desolate and dangerous. The surrounding trees blocked out the sun, and the sky was almost invisible. There were no roads in many places, and the weeds were taller than people. They had to rely on Yixing, the guide sent by Qi Ziding, to lead the way. On this day, as they were advancing, they suddenly heard a roar that sounded like a lion or a tiger. The sound was so loud that it sounded like a drum being beaten beside their ears. Even though they were thousands of meters away, they could still feel the unparalleled ferocity of the beast. Renbochin subconsciously approached the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, there seems to be a big guy in front." After being in the 60,000 mountains for so long, he could gradually distinguish the strength of some beasts. Although he had never encountered this beast in front of him, he knew that it wasn't to be trifled with just from its might. Moreover, after hearing this roar, the crow general that Renbochin was sitting on also became vigilant. One had to know that the crow general was a cardinal heaven-level beast and was even more powerful than an ordinary cardinal heaven expert. Only the Empress could subdue it. Even it behaved like this after hearing the roar. From this, it could be seen that the beast in front was definitely extremely powerful. Chapter 751. Yixing's words caused a commotion. The winged cavalry warriors in the team were all recruited from the 60,000 mountains. Many of them had heard of the Xiongyan when they were in the village. The aboriginals who visited the village mentioned it as a legend. It was said that 1,300 kilometers south of the Yu family village, there was a red mountain called Two Mountain. Some people said that a long time ago, there was a group of ferocious beasts on the mountain that were even more powerful than cardinal heaven experts. They wreaked havoc everywhere and destroyed many villages. Later on, an aboriginal expert gathered the troops of many villages to attack and exterminate the group of beasts. The expert died on the spot, and many villages also suffered heavy casualties. That mountain was dyed red by the blood of the aboriginals and ferocious beasts that perished. Ever since that battle, not even a blade of grass grew on Two Mountain. In the past 100 years, Two Mountain was occupied by another ferocious beast. It was a Xiongyan. It was more than 20 meters tall, had a human-like face, and was covered in short black hair. There was a silver line on its back, and it had no tail. It could walk upright. This ferocious beast destroyed a nearby village as soon as it appeared. However, it stayed within 50 kilometers of Two Mountain and didn't cause any more casualties. Furthermore, it was very powerful, so no one went to attack it. However, it was rumored that this ferocious beast was bloodthirsty. Unlike other ferocious beasts that killed for food, this ferocious beast killed for pleasure. Hence, it was called Xiongyan. Are you sure it's a Xiongyan? Gongjing frowned as he looked at the dense forest in front of them. I should be right. I went to the vicinity of Two Mountain and saw a Xiongyan once. However, it was quite a distance away and it was hunting a ferocious beast that trespassed into its territory. That's why I ran away when it wasn't paying attention, Yixing said with an ugly expression. Yixing said with an ugly expression. When he recalled the ferocious might of the huge ferocious beast, he felt perturbed in his heart. Is there any other way? Gongjing asked again. If we take a detour, we will have to walk for at least a week and pass through the venomous worm valley. Gongjing's expression became even uglier. Venomous worms were palm-sized insects that weren't powerful. The problem was that they appeared in groups, and many ferocious beasts avoided them. Furthermore, it was rumored that venomous worms were everywhere in the venomous worm valley. For this team, it was a greater threat than the Xiongyan. Come with me to see His Majesty. After listening to their conversation, the Empress pondered for a while and asked, "How powerful is that Xiongyan?" "Your Majesty, there was a cardinal heaven expert in the village that was destroyed. He disappeared with the destruction of the village, so he probably didn't manage to escape." Yixing recalled the rumors from back then, and a trace of fear appeared in his eyes. One had to know that cardinal heaven experts were like gods in the eyes of the aboriginals. They could be said to be the top experts. However, such an expert had perished before the Xiongyan. He hadn't even been able to escape. It was clear how terrifying the Xiongyan was. As Rinpoche listened, he had some other ideas. That cardinal heaven expert probably died to protect the village or to buy time for the ordinary people in the village. Although that Xiongyan was powerful, it shouldn't be so powerful that it was far more powerful than a cardinal heaven expert, to the point where it couldn't even run away. After all, this was only the middle layer of the 60,000 mountains, and they were still very far away from the deeper layers. There weren't many cardinal heaven beasts in this area, let alone such a powerful one. However, just in case, Rinpoche said, "Your Majesty, why don't we go back and not go to the spiritual spring? If we were to encounter danger and lose manpower because of this matter, it would be a great loss." The Empress glanced at him and said, "I'm going to take a look. I want to see how powerful that Xiongyan is." "Your Majesty." Gongzheng hurriedly stopped her. "Don't try to persuade me. I'm just going to take a look." The Empress waved her hand. "Your Majesty, I'll go with you," Rinpoche immediately said. Gongzheng squinted at Rinpoche. "Are you going to be a burden? If Her Majesty and I don't come back in 2 hours, you can go back a day's journey and wait for 3 days." "We will definitely come back," Rinpoche said to Gongzheng. The Empress immediately understood what Rinpoche meant. "Your Majesty, please wait a moment." Rinpoche thought that it was better to bring Lin Chaola along. At least she could be used as a meat shield. The beasts were still roaring in the distance, which made Gongzheng even more worried. Beasts wouldn't keep roaring like this. Usually, they would only roar like this when they encountered a strong enemy that was even stronger than them. Could it be that there was a beast that was as strong as the Xiongyan? When did the middle area of the 60,000 mountains become so dangerous? Rinpoche followed the group and found Lin Chaola, who was lying on the back of the jumping goat. Then, he kicked her in the small buttocks. Lin Chaola jumped up and gave him a claw. Although Rinpoche sensed that something was wrong and tried his best to shrink back, he still felt a chill on his face. Then, he felt a tingling sensation and warm liquid flowing on his face. Lin Chaola's nails were about 1 inch long as she glared at Rinpoche. "I woke you up to eat sweets," Rinpoche said calmly. He was already used to the wounds on his face and just needed to apply some ointment. "Oh." Lin Chaola was furious a second ago, but she calmed down a second later. Although she didn't know when she would receive such benefits, it was always good to have sweets. Even if she was kicked in her sleep, she wouldn't be so angry. Rinpoche grabbed a handful of white rabbit creamy candies and threw them to her. "I have something to do. Follow me." He brought Lin Chaola to meet the Empress and asked everyone to stay where they were while the 3 of them entered the dense forest ahead. The trees in the forest were dozens of meters tall, and the various plants on the ground were as tall as a person. It would be difficult for an ordinary person to move an inch here, but it didn't affect the 3 of them much. The Empress and Lin Chaola's figures flashed on the tree branches. Rinpoche had to pull the vines on the tree from time to time and had to slow down the 2 people in front of him to barely keep up. A distance of more than 1,000 meters wasn't considered far for the 3 of them, and they closed the distance in just a few minutes. The beast's roar was getting louder, and it was so deafening that it hurt their eardrums. Rinpoche leaped toward a tree branch in front of him. When he was about 3 to 4 meters away, he stretched out his hand to grab a hanging vine. However, when he grabbed it, he felt a slippery feeling that was different from the vine. That vine actually fell along with him. This gave him a fright. When he looked up again, it wasn't a vine, but a slender snake that was about 6 to 7 meters long. It was waving in his hand and trying to bite him. Swoosh! The shadow of a claw slashed across, and the snake was immediately divided into 6 parts. Lin Chaola carried Renbachien and kicked off the tree trunk before landing on a branch. That gave me a fright. Renbachien patted his chest with lingering fear. Using a snake as a vine to pull was indeed frightening. Fortunately, he wasn't bitten. One had to know that there were many venomous snakes in this mountain. Renbachien spoke very softly for fear that the beast in front of him would hear him. However, he also knew that he probably wouldn't be able to hide from the other party at this distance. Beasts were much more sensitive than humans. Fortunately, the other party didn't know what kind of opponent it was facing and probably didn't have the opportunity to pay attention to them. After jumping 2 more branches, Renbachien began to feel a little strange. This was because there wasn't any open space around them. There were tall trees, various vines, and all kinds of vegetation covering the ground. According to the sound, the other party should be on the ground in front of the 3 of them. However, that Xiong Yen was said to be more than 20 meters tall and had a huge body. How could it possibly be squeezed in such a forest? However, the sound came from the underbrush diagonally below them. The 3 of them looked around but didn't see the huge beast that they had expected. Instead, they saw a familiar figure, the Bichi. The Bichi stood on a branch and stared blankly in a certain direction with its small eyes full of doubt. Following the Bichi's gaze, the 3 of them finally found the so-called Xiong Yen. A 1-meter-tall gopher with a gray head and brown other parts of its body was standing there, waving its small claws and roaring at the Bichi. As it opened its mouth, it let out a sound that didn't match its size at all. It was loud like thunder and full of ferocity. However, its body and face didn't match the sound at all. It was like a rabbit letting out the roar of a Tyrannosaurus rex, which was full of dissonance. Its playful face was now full of anger and a little puzzlement. In the past, I only needed to roar like this to make all the surrounding animals run away. Why aren't you running away? Aren't I tired of roaring? The Bichi was also dumbfounded. Why is this thing roaring at me? It's neither fighting nor running away. Why is it just standing there and roaring? Furthermore, how can this body make such a loud sound? Is this a Xiong Yen? Renbachien pointed at the thing that looked like a gopher and couldn't believe it. It was different from what he had described. The Empress was also puzzled. In a flash, she landed behind the gopher that was roaring at the Bichi, reached out, grabbed the back of its neck, and lifted it up. The gopher panicked at first, then turned its head and roared at the Empress. The Empress's expression became even weirder. This roar really made her feel like she was facing some kind of powerful ferocious beast. She even subconsciously felt vigilant. However, the thing in her hand was at most at the manual level. It couldn't struggle at all when the Empress grabbed it. Chapter 752. As the gopher in the Empress's hand inhaled, its entire body swelled up like a balloon, and a louder sound came out of its mouth. Roar! The sound wave directly blew the Empress's red muslin and fine black hair backward. Renbachien covered his ears from the tree trunk and was horrified. He used to use a loudspeaker in the imperial court to win people over by virtue. Therefore, he was more sensitive to the decibels of sound. He estimated that the voice of this mole creature was at least 170 decibels or more. The sound of a chainsaw was 110 decibels, and the noise of a jet plane was around 130 decibels. The noise produced by a rocket was only 160 to 170 decibels. The sound of this gopher's voice was even louder than that of a rocket. A noise of 170 decibels could not only deafen people in an instant, but it could also kill people at close range. Although it could kill ordinary people, it was enough to show the power of such a loud sound. Even an earth-will expert would be greatly injured if he heard such a sound at close range. For example, Renbachian's ears buzzed with this roar, and all other sounds seemed to become softer in the distance. He was still more than 10 meters away from the gopher, and it wasn't in the direction of the gopher's roar, but he was still greatly affected. One could imagine the impact that the Empress, who was carrying it, received. Fortunately, the Empress's strength wasn't comparable to that of an ordinary person. Although she received a huge impact, she didn't suffer any injuries. Seeing that it was inhaling again, the Empress shook her hand, and the gopher immediately became like a deflated balloon. Its body that had just swelled up immediately returned to its original size. Woof! Woof woof! The beachy barked at the gopher from the tree branch. It probably felt that the outcome was set, so it turned around and disappeared into the forest. Renbachian and Lin Chaola jumped down from the tree and landed beside the Empress. Renbachian circled the Empress twice and sized up the mole in her hand. Then, he said, "It's male." "What male?" the Empress asked in astonishment. "This fellow is male." Renbachian pointed at the gopher in her hand. The Empress's face immediately turned black. "You went around in circles just to figure out if this thing was male or female. You've been keeping an eye on Qi Shui and the Crow General every day, and now your first reaction when you see a ferocious beast is to look at its gender first. What kind of perverse hobby was this? But this thing's cry is really loud." Renbachian looked at the gopher in the Empress's hand. It was indeed a gopher. It looked extremely similar to its kind on Earth. It had a shorter mouth, 2 big front teeth, cheeks that could store food, and was chubby and drooping a little. The only difference was the color of its fur and the fact that it was slightly bigger. At this moment, his pair of small eyes were rolling around, and no one knew what he was thinking. "Let's go back first," the Empress said as she held the hamster by its neck. She didn't expect that the thing that made the team so anxious was actually this thing. "Your Majesty, if this thing makes a sound, it will be quite lethal. Your Majesty should be careful. It was best to kill it." To avoid any trouble, Renbachian said. "This thing wasn't like other vicious beasts. Even if it roared in your ear, you wouldn't be able to stand it. It was too dangerous." Woof! Renbachian was taken aback when he heard this sound. He almost thought that the beachy had returned. However, this sound came from this little thing in front of him. Woof woof! The gopher seemed to understand Renbachian's words. Not only did its previous roar become a beachy-like barking, but it also wasn't loud. It looked at the Empress with its teary eyes and wagged its tail vigorously. In fact, its tail was very short and was only the size of a ball. Therefore, it was more appropriate to say that it was wagging its tail or shaking its butt. Disregarding other aspects, this little thing was born with the ability to please people. Seeing this, the Empress's heart immediately softened. Women always lacked resistance toward furry things. If it was stubbornly resisting, the Empress wouldn't even think about it. However, it looked pitiful at this moment, and the Empress's heart softened. She raised the gopher in front of her face and said, "It looks like you can understand human language. If you bark randomly, no one can save you." The gophers but shook even faster. "Let's go back first," the Empress said. The three of them passed through the forest at a slower speed and returned to their original position. They saw many winged cavalry warriors standing there and looking around. Seeing that the Empress had returned, everyone immediately cheered. The Xiongnian's roar had stopped just now, but there were no sounds of fighting. As a result, everyone was still guessing what had happened. Now that the Empress had returned, everyone was relieved. The Empress returned to the carriage, called Gongzheng and Yixing over, and showed the gopher to them. Is this a xiongyan? No. Yixing shook his head like a rattledrum. Then what is it? It looks like a male gopher. Yixing said cautiously. The Empress's face darkened again. It wasn't because it was a gopher. It was because Yixing said it was a male gopher. It was exactly the same as Renbaqian. Why did your majesty catch a gopher? Both of them were puzzled. The roar just now came from it, Renbaqian said leisurely. Impossible. Their first reaction was disbelief. How could this thing make such a ferocious roar? Yixing, who had seen a xiongyan before, was even more certain that it was the gopher's roar. Are you questioning Her Majesty? Let them hear it. Renbaqian put on a fake smile. We don't dare. The two of them said. The gopher seemed to understand Renbaqian's words and turned to look at the Empress behind it. Roar, the Empress said coldly. Roar. Roar. It was like a sudden clap of thunder. The gopher's roar caused the surroundings to panic. The jumping goats led the winged cavalry warriors to run all over the mountains in a panic, as if they were herding goats. Renbaqian, Qing Yuan, Hong Wuan, Lin Chaola, and the two people standing in front of them were the only ones left. At this moment, Qing Yuan, Hong Wuan, Gong Zheng, and Yixing all looked pained. Although Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were behind the gopher, they were too weak. Gong Zheng and Yixing took a direct hit as if they were hammered. They retreated a few steps, swayed, and seemed to be unable to control their bodies. The deafening noise destroyed the balance of the two of them. After the gopher finished roaring, it looked pleased with itself. It seemed that it was very confident in its voice. Renbaqian put down his hands that were covering his ears and smiled at the two of them. How do you feel? The two of them looked at Renbaqian blankly. Their ears were buzzing, and they couldn't hear what Renbaqian was saying. Both of your noses are bleeding. Renbaqian pointed at the two of them. Damn! Their eyes and ears are bleeding too. Renbaqian was shocked. Did something happen to the two of them? After 7 or 8 minutes, the two of them gradually recovered, proving that it was a false alarm. However, they still had to shout when talking to the two of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to hear him clearly. Tell me, how should I deal with you? The Empress asked faintly as she put the gopher down. If Renbaqian had to describe the gopher's current expression, it would be submissive. Your Majesty, this gopher seems to be somewhat useful. Why don't you keep it for now? Renbaqian suggested. It was more than just somewhat useful. Gong Zheng was considered extremely powerful in Kismet Heaven, but his balance was destroyed by this gopher that only knew how to roar, causing him to bleed from all his orifices. This showed the power of the gopher's roar. It was simply a living sonic weapon. The next day, Renbaqian was a little worried that the gopher would find an opportunity to run away. However, he slowly realized that not only did the gopher not run away at night, but it was also extremely close to people. It wasn't only the Empress, but also Renbaqian, Qing Yuan, Hong Wuan, and everyone else. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan laughed and kept rubbing the gopher's belly. It also liked to turn over and let people touch it. Even if Renbaqian flicked its penis, this gopher seemed to be born to please people. Renbaqian gave it a name, Roaring Emperor. Renbaqian felt that this name couldn't be more appropriate. In addition, he realized that this gopher seemed to be able to imitate the sounds of other creatures. Not only did it bark like the beachy, but it also made the sound of a jumping sheep. Furthermore, it imitated it very well. If one closed their eyes and listened to it, it really sounded like a jumping sheep. Even the winged cavalry couldn't distinguish it. Chapter 753. Although the rest of the journey wasn't too troublesome, there were still a lot of small problems. After all, the 60,000 mountains had never been a comfortable and safe place for the aboriginals who had lived here for generations. There were all kinds of strange insects and beasts. Rinpoche saw groups of stomach worms. They were carnivorous insects that emitted a dark green glow from their abdomens, had translucent black wings, and were about the size of half a palm. The scene of this kind of worm passing by was really everywhere, and the whole mountain top was dyed black and dark green. Countless ferocious beasts fled frantically. Some of them were covered with worms, and they fell powerlessly after running for a short distance. Then, they were swarmed by worms, and after that, only white bones were left. This scene was extremely terrifying. A single stomach worm was very weak and could be trampled to death with one stomp. However, tens of millions of stomach worms gathered together could make any powerful beast retreat. Rinpoche and the others waited for these worms to pass by for 2 full days. Another type of creature that was more troublesome was the flat top of the 60,000 mountains, the Yong. It was a creature with a mouth full of fangs, a slender body, short brown hair, and looked somewhat like a gopher. However, this thing wasn't something that a timid gopher could compare to. The Yong could be said to go against the heavens, the earth, and the air. There was no species that it didn't dare to go against, and there was no enemy that it didn't dare to bite. It spent its entire life either fighting or on the way to fighting. No matter what kind of creature it faced, it never flinched, whether it was a powerful beast, a venomous snake, hundreds of winged cavalry warriors, or an army of stomach worms. There was nothing that it didn't dare to take the initiative to attack. More importantly, not only did these creatures form groups, but they were also extremely vengeful. If one escaped, you would find yourself surrounded by countless of them the next day. Not only did the Yong have thick skin and flesh that allowed it to survive a blow from the winged cavalry, but it was also extremely intelligent. It could discover the enemy's weakness in a short period of time and target it. For example, a man's balls. 2 unlucky fellows had their balls bitten off by this thing. For example, the Crow General's chrysanthemum. The combination of all these characteristics made this creature, which looked a little cute but had a terrible personality, become the overlord of the 60,000 mountains. It also became the most troublesome creature for Rinpoche and the others for a period of time. Even the aura of the Empress couldn't scare them away. Every day, when they opened their eyes, they would discover that they were surrounded by thousands of fanged beasts that appeared out of nowhere. They simply couldn't kill all of them, and this gave everyone a headache. In the end, the one to solve this problem was Roaring Emperor, whose combat power was so weak that he could only rely on roars. This kind of beast had rough skin and thick flesh. It was very resilient, and its body was also very agile. However, it had no resistance to the Roaring Emperor's roar. With a single roar, a small portion of them fainted. Even if they didn't faint, their balance was greatly affected and they died under the blades of the winged cavalry. The price was that for 3 days, most of the winged cavalry couldn't hear anything clearly. You have to yell to talk face to face. Seizing this opportunity, the Aboriginals finally comprehended sign language. In addition, there were many exotic flowers and herbs that he collected along with some leftover ferocious beasts. He brought them back to Earth and handed them over to the laboratory. After leaving the Yi family village for a full 21 days, everyone finally arrived at a barren land. Gloomy forests, rugged rocks, and gusts of chilly wind were all that was here. The blood-red land was everything. Rinpoche felt that the sky here was somewhat gloomy and wasn't as bright as other places. The number of ferocious beasts, snakes, and insects in the surroundings began to decrease. All of this indicated that they were very close to the Earth-Een spring. Your Majesty, there's a village built on the mountain ahead, Gongjing sent someone to report. There's a village here. Rinpoche was a little surprised. Putting everything else aside, there were very few living creatures here. How could there be a village here? Your Majesty, if possible, it's best to take a detour, Yixing said as he rode his mount back. I passed by that village when I first came here. The people inside are very strange. Hearing this, the Empress and Renbochin felt that it was strange. As there were many ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains, it was extremely dangerous. The Aboriginals lived in groups, and unless there was hatred between them, they wouldn't pass by a village without entering it. After all, it was safer to spend the night in a village than in the wilderness. Not to mention Yixing's words, the people inside are very strange. What do you think, Your Majesty? Renbochin turned his head and asked. The Aboriginals in the 60,000 mountains are all my people. Why should I take a detour? I want to see if there's anything wrong with it, the Empress said. Hearing this, Yixing had no choice but to lead the way. Soon, they arrived at the village, and Renbochin and the Empress began to feel that something was wrong. Logically speaking, in such a desolate place with so many people, the people in the village would definitely come out to check and ask questions. However, no one came out when they arrived at the village. Furthermore, the gate of the village was wide open, and there wasn't a single Aborigine inside. Everyone's first reaction was that the people in the village had left, and this place had been abandoned. This was very common in the 60,000 mountains, just like the village that had been destroyed by the Xiongyan. However, there weren't any signs of destruction around this village, which was a little strange. Gongzheng, go and take a look, the Empress ordered with a frown. Gongzheng led 10 cavalrymen straight into the village. After a while, he came back with 2 people and threw them on the ground. Your Majesty, there are people in the village. We have caught 2 of them. Renbochin looked up and saw that one of them was an old man and the other was a middle-aged woman. However, both of them had one thing in common, they weren't wearing anything and were completely naked. However, this wasn't what caught people's attention. It was their expressions that were dull, numb, and without any color in their eyes. Even though they were caught and thrown into the group by the winged cavalry in front of so many people, their expressions didn't change at all. Another thing was the color of their skin. Most Aboriginals had bronze-colored skin, and only a few of them had fairer skin when they were exposed to the sun. On the other hand, the skin of these 2 people was greenish-black. Looking at these 2 people, even a fool could tell that there was something wrong. Who are you? The Empress asked as she sat in the carriage. Don't you know how to greet me when you see me? However, their expressions were still dull as if they hadn't heard what the Empress said. The Empress frowned. She didn't think that these 2 people were ignoring her, but that they were really strange. Are you deaf? Gongzheng scolded. How dare you be so indifferent in front of Her Majesty? I will kill you. Sir, it's useless, Yixing said. What do you know? Chapter 754. Renbochin and his entourage entered the stronghold and saw that there were hundreds of stone houses arranged in a ring. In the middle of the stronghold was a huge open space. In the open space, there were some bonfires and bits and pieces of sundries. This made the stronghold a little more lively. He carefully looked at the houses on both sides. Although they were the kind of stone houses that were commonly seen in the Aboriginals, the stones here were the same as the soil. They were mottled dark red as if they had been stained with blood. Pushing open the door of a stone room, there was only a wooden bed, a table, 3 stools, and a cabinet inside. Apart from them, there were 2 other people. A man and a woman in their 30s or 40s were sitting on the bed with their eyes fixed in front of them. Their entire bodies were covered in a greenish-gray color, and they were not wearing anything. Renbochin walked up to the 2 of them and looked at them. Their gazes were the same as the previous 2 people. There was not a trace of life in them, as if they were dead people. Renbochin touched their foreheads. They were still warm, but it was a little lower than that of an ordinary person. He probed his nose and found that there was also breathing, but it was very slow and light. He wanted to place his hand on the woman's chest to sense her heartbeat, but considering the thickness of the fat on her chest, it would be difficult to sense her heartbeat. In the end, he placed his hand on the man's chest. His heart beat about 10 times a minute. "What are you doing?" the Empress asked as she walked into the room and saw Renbochin placing his hand on the man's chest. Renbochin turned his head and said, "Their heartbeat is very slow. It's about 10 beats per minute, while a normal person's heart rate is 80 beats per minute. The heartbeat of an Aboriginal was about 80 beats per minute. This was probably to provide sufficient blood and energy to the body, so it was slightly faster than an ordinary person's." "Oh." The Empress nodded. "Let's take a look at the other rooms." Renbochin walked to the door and pulled the Empress out. After entering 7 or 8 rooms in a row, the situation inside was more or less the same. There were people sitting in each room, men and women, and they were similarly naked. Whether it was the skin color, the eyes that resembled a dead person's, or the condition of their bodies, they were all about the same. If it weren't for their breathing and heartbeats, he would have thought that they were clay puppets. When they entered another room, Renbochin suddenly asked, "Has Your Majesty discovered a problem?" "What?" "There don't seem to be any young people or children," Renbochin said with a frown. After hearing Renbochin's words, the Empress recalled that those houses they entered just now were filled with people above the age of 30 or 40. Not only were there no children, there weren't even any youths in their teens or 20s. It was normal for 1 or 2 houses to have this kind of situation, but it was abnormal for 7 or 8 houses to have this kind of situation. According to the ratio, the proportion of youths and children under the age of 30 would not be less than 1/3. After all, the lifespan of an ordinary Aboriginal was less than 100 years. Let's wait and see. At this moment, Renbochin had entered the mode of a primary school student. He had never encountered such a strange thing in his life, and such a strange village had piqued his curiosity. "Justice!" The Empress called Gongjing as soon as she stepped out of the door. "Get someone to check all the rooms and see if there are any youths or children below the age of 30. Renbochin didn't care about the Empress's arrangements. Instead, he pushed open the doors one by one to take a look. When he had walked past half of the houses, Gongjing sent him a message: "There are no young people or children in any of the houses." Soon after, Renbochin, the Empress, and the rest found a corner in the village to rest and wait to see what would happen tonight. According to Yixing, these people would come back to life at night. Renbochin pondered for a long time while he was resting, but he couldn't come up with anything. Instead, he had a lot of messy and unreliable ideas. For example, being possessed by ghosts, or that the people here had died many years ago. After all, this place was very close to the Earth-Een Spring, and it was only a day's journey away. Legend had it that the Earth-Een Spring was a passageway to the world of the dead. Coupled with the strangeness of this village, Renbochin's imagination ran wild. When everyone arrived, it was already close to 3:00 in the afternoon. After waiting for another 4 hours, the curtain of night began to fall. When the sun completely set, a strange smell began to pervade the village. It smelled like the fishy smell of soil. Soon after, all kinds of sounds began to appear in the village, which had always been quiet. The sounds of people stretching, talking, and sighing could be heard from the stone houses. Renbochin's eyes were fixed on the 2 people who had been thrown on the ground not far away. As the curtain of night fell, the old man and the middle-aged woman opened their eyes one after another, looked around, and walked toward the stone houses in the village as if they didn't see anyone. Following their footsteps, the rest of the people also came out of the houses one after another. All of them were naked, and their expressions were somewhat stiff as they greeted the people around them. "Musu, have you dealt with today's prey?" "That was 3 days ago." "Your memory is getting worse and worse." "Su Damien, you didn't even wear any clothes and just came out swaying around. Be careful that the elder will beat you to death." Sui, aren't you going to your city? When are you leaving? Who has seen that kid of mine? I don't know where he went last night, and I couldn't find him after looking for him for an entire day. Auntie, do you have any wild vegetables? Catch some for me. The Empress, Renbachien, and the winged cavalry warriors frowned as they looked at the village that had suddenly become lively. Your Majesty, that person should be called Su Damien. He didn't wear any clothes when others asked him, but he asked another person when they were going to your city. The conversation between these people doesn't match up at all. They aren't talking at all, but talking about something that has been prearranged in advance, Renbachien said as he patted the Empress on the back of her hand. The Empress nodded. She could tell without Renbachien saying anything. However, Renbachien was more familiar with this phenomenon than the Empress. This reminded him of the NPCs in games. They spoke according to the preset program. This was the feeling that the people in the village gave him. It's a little strange. Gongjing said as he stood at the side with his arms crossed. There are so many of us here, but none of these people are looking over. Very quickly, one of the phenomena attracted the attention of Renbachien and the others. 30 to 40 people formed a group and walked out of the village. Let's follow them and take a look. Renbachien immediately jumped up from the ground. Renbachien and the others didn't avoid the group. They passed through the middle of the village and followed the group out of the village. After walking for about an hour, those people stopped at a place where there were pits everywhere. Then, they used their hands to dig the ground around them. Very quickly, Renbachien knew what they were digging for. Each of them was as long as a child's arm and had a green body. Those people grabbed the squirming worms in their hands. Each of them grabbed 5 or 6 worms with both hands. Then, they stood in a line and walked back to the village. Throughout the process, those people were still talking according to the preset program. Strange. Chapter 755. Under the red moon, more than 100 aboriginals were eating food in the village. They were green worms that were as long as a child's arm. When they bit down, there would be a chi sound and a blue liquid would spurt out. The worms would also squeak. Renbachien, the Empress, and the others who were watching from the side felt their blood run cold. What's going on? Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan turned pale and asked softly. Or should I say, are they still alive? Renbachien frowned and asked, are there any legends of sorcery in the 60,000 mountains? As far as I know, there aren't. The Empress shook her head and asked someone to call Yixing over. Renbachien asked again, but Yixing shook his head. Were they like this the last time you were here? Renbachien asked again. Yixing shook his head and replied, they weren't like this the last time I was here. When I was here last time, I found that the people in this village liked the night and didn't like the day. Moreover, his expression was wooden and his speech was slow. I felt that it was strange, so I hurried to leave. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. When was the last time you were here? 16 years ago. At that time, I found traces of a mountain song and followed it all the way here. However, this place was strange, and there were no traces of the mountain song. After searching for a few days, I retreated. Renbachien naturally didn't know what a mountain song was. In fact, there were countless strange beasts in the 60,000 mountains, and the areas that no one had set foot in were even larger than the known areas. Therefore, he couldn't be bothered to ask about the strange beasts in the mountains. In any case, he would naturally know when he saw them. Unexpectedly, Gongjing was a little surprised and asked, is there still a mountain song? That should be right. I heard from the elders in the village that the mountain song likes to grind its teeth with stones and leaves all kinds of filth on the stones. I discovered it by chance. Not only are there filth on the stones, but there are also traces of teeth grinding. In fact, I heard that there are such beasts in the depths, but this area hasn't been seen for many years. Judging from their conversation, this kind of strange beast was somewhat special. Renbochin became curious and asked, "What is a mountain song?" "It's a monster that looks like a human. It's usually about 3 meters tall, and its movements are clumsy, but it's very strong. It likes to eat people, and it has 2 very long fangs in its mouth. In the past, there were many of these monsters. Later on, under the encirclement of the Aboriginals, their numbers gradually decreased," Yixing explained. "It's a little strange," Renbochin casually replied. "In Dayo, 10 feet was more than 3 meters, and a height of more than 10 feet was at least 3 to 7 meters. Furthermore, it was in the shape of a human." Renbochin wondered if it was a gorilla or something like that. King Kong. His body size was about the same. Then, he talked about what happened in the stockade village. According to Yixing, these people didn't always become like this. Instead, they gradually became like this. This is a process. Therefore, they must have been influenced by something to become like this. The Empress looked up at him and asked, "What do you think?" "No idea. I don't even know if they're dead or alive. Or, we can catch one and cut it open to take a look." The Empress glared at him as soon as he finished speaking. "We must first understand their situation before we can decide on our next step. In any case, they are no different from being dead. In other words, they are now a group of puppets with warmth and heartbeats," Renbochin said indifferently. "Your Majesty, if you want me to live like this, I might as well die," Gongjing said. The thought of living like a puppet was really a terrifying thing. The Empress pondered for a while and asked, "Can we find the reason why they became like this by cutting them open?" "Of course, not." Renbochin panted as he spoke. The Empress was so angry that her eyebrows twitched. She punched him and sent him flying. Renbochin was sent flying more than 20 meters away and even knocked down a puppet that was closest to them. When Renbochin got up, that puppet also slowly sat on the ground. At this moment, the Aboriginals in the stockade village had finished eating the worms and were all sitting there in silence. They didn't even speak that language that seemed to have been programmed for them. The entire stockade village fell into silence. However, under the moonlight, one could see the silhouettes of people sitting there. It was a strange atmosphere. Renbochin took another look at the puppet that he had knocked down before returning to sit opposite the Empress. Looking at their current state, we can only search for the reason bit by bit. We have to use all kinds of methods, but even so, we may not be able to find the reason. After all, their appearance is too strange, and it can't be caused by ordinary circumstances. Cutting them open is only one of the options. We can see if there are any differences between them and ordinary people, and we may be able to find something. In our place, this is called an autopsy. At this moment, Renbochin had already treated these people as living corpses. Fortunately, these people didn't bite. Otherwise, he would have thought that it was a resident evil from another world. "I understand." The Empress sighed. She knew that what Renbochin said was right. "Do as you say. You, find someone to cut open and take a look. I'm scared of blood." Renbochin kicked Gongjing. In fact, he didn't have much hope for this method. The situation of these people was too strange. In particular, these people kept repeating certain words that seemed to have been programmed. This wasn't something that could be done with ordinary methods. Under such circumstances, even if he brought them back to Earth, there might not be a solution. However, since these people were already in such a state, he might as well give it a try. Perhaps he might be able to find something. Gongjing walked around the village and finally found an old man. He brought him back and threw him to the ground. That old man swayed on the ground, got up, and walked back to his original seat. Hold him down, Gongjing shouted. Then, 2 people pressed him to the ground. Gongjing held the knife for a long time, turned his head, and asked Rinpochen, "Where do I cut from?" He had killed people before, but he had never done this before. Although Rinpochen had killed many people, he had never done this before. He felt that it was a little strange. He looked at Gongjing and then at the puppet that was pressed to the ground. He said helplessly, "We have to turn him over first." "What are you guys doing with his back up there?" After they turned him over, Rinpochen said, "Cut the skin on his arm first and check the blood." Gongjing waved his long knife, and a 10-centimeter long cut appeared on the arm of the puppet. Then, everyone frowned. Everyone present had seen blood before, so they knew what it looked like when a person's skin was cut open. This puppet was definitely different from a normal person. After more than 10 seconds, dark red blood slowly seeped out of the wound. Not only was there very little blood, but it was also very viscous. "Stomach," Rinpochen said again. Gongjing gestured at the other party's stomach, and the puppet seemed to sense danger. The wooden expression on its face suddenly turned malevolent and crazy. It struggled with all its might and erupted with great strength. The 2 winged cavalry warriors actually had to expend a lot of effort to hold it down. "Ugh!" One of the winged cavalry warriors groaned in pain. The puppet that was being held down suddenly twisted its neck and bit him. At this moment, Gongjing's knife fell. A line of blood appeared on the other party's chest. Chapter 756. Those blood vessel-like things were extremely fast like arrows. The 2 winged cavalry warriors weren't paying attention and didn't realize it until it was too late. The blood vessel-like things pierced their bodies. Damn it! Gongjing was furious when he saw this and slashed the other party in half with his steel saber. However, everyone was shocked when the puppet was split into 2. There were no internal organs. Countless vessel-like objects were connected to the puppet. After Gongjing's slash, those blood vessels were cut off one after another. Many of them fell outside the body and kept swaying as if they were alive. All the tendrils were connected to a fist-sized meatball. This meatball and the vessel-like objects had completely occupied that person's body. Gongjing was tongue-tied as he looked at the scene in front of him. It was completely beyond his imagination. Not far away, many winged cavalry warriors cried out in alarm, and the sound of them sucking in cold air rose and fell. The Empress walked over when she heard the noise. Her expression changed slightly when she saw the scene in front of her. Gongjing turned to look at the Empress and said sincerely, "Sir Ren, you guessed correctly. There's indeed a problem." Rinpochen grinned. This was luck. He just felt that he had to use all kinds of methods, but he didn't expect to discover the problem with just one slash. However, this scene was really disgusting. He turned to look at the 2 winged cavalry warriors who had been pierced by the blood vessel-like objects and asked, "What do you think?" The 2 of them pulled out the blood vessel-like objects and threw them on the ground. Then, they pulled out their steel sabers and cut them into several pieces before saying hatefully, "Fortunately, they didn't hit any vital parts." "That's good. If you feel that something is wrong, tell me." Rinpochen nodded. He then turned to look at the flesh and blood and the corpse and frowned. It seems that his internal organs were eaten by this thing. This thing has replaced the internal organs to maintain the existence of the body. "What is this thing?" the Empress asked with a frown. "I don't know." Rinpochen spread his hands. The others also shook their heads. This kind of situation had never been seen or heard of before. No one had ever thought that such a thing could actually happen. "Lend me your saber." Rinpochen took the saber from Gongjing's hand and flicked the meatball to the ground. The meatball was actually still moving. The 10 heartbeats per minute that he sensed were coming from this meatball. Renbochin used his saber to cut the meatball open again and discovered that there was something else inside. A red bug. Or rather, it was a butterfly that had yet to take shape. Wings had already begun to form, wrapping tightly around his body. One had to look carefully to distinguish them. As the meatball was cut open, the liquid inside flowed out, and the layer of wings began to slowly unfold. However, it was clear that although the body had grown, only a small part of the wings had formed. Most importantly, there was an extremely small and twisted human face on the butterfly's body. If one looked closely, this face was the same as the original owner's. Then this meatball was actually a cocoon. The vein-like things were used to control the body and to absorb nutrients. They were the tentacles of the cocoon. Weird. Renbochin felt even weirder. Even if these people were possessed by ghosts, it would be easier for him to accept it. One had to know that a part of the Empress's soul was still in his body. One had to know that there were 2 divine weapons formed from the divine soul in his mind. But he never expected it to be a butterfly, and a butterfly with a human face. At this moment, there was another change in the stronghold. As the cocoon was cut open, the other puppets seemed to have received some kind of signal. They stood up one after another, let out extremely deep sounds, and pounced toward the people. Although the sounds weren't loud, when gathered together, it made people feel suffocated, nauseous, and dizzy. Kill them. The Empress ordered as she looked at the many puppets pouncing toward them. After seeing the condition of the bodies, she didn't hesitate anymore. These people couldn't be considered humans anymore. There were less than 200 puppets in the stronghold, but there were 300 Kismet heaven-winged cavalry warriors here. As soon as they came into contact, severed limbs flew everywhere. What shocked everyone was that more than 10 people were actually injured. These puppets could still move even after being cut in half. Furthermore, the vein-like things in their bodies pierced through their skin at the speed of an arrow. At such a close distance, many people were immediately hit. Don't chop off their heads. Split them open. They are controlled by the meatball in their bodies. Chop off the tentacles of the meatball, Renbochin immediately shouted. With Renbochin's reminder, everyone reacted and chopped off their opponents one after another. Next, they cut open their opponents' stomachs and chopped off more than half of the meatball's tentacles. Soon after, everyone realized that as long as they chopped off more than half of the tentacles, the other party seemed to lose its strength and wouldn't shoot out those tentacles again. In just a short while, all the puppets in the stronghold were killed. The meatballs were picked out of their bodies and chopped into pieces with knives. One of the winged cavalry warriors died as well. His heart was pierced by a tentacle. In addition, nearly 20 people were injured. Pick out the things in their stomachs, kill them, and then bury them, the Empress ordered. Although the puppets were all killed, she still didn't look too good. After all, these puppets still looked like aboriginals. Renbochin stroked his beard and looked thoughtfully at the butterfly with a human face on the ground. What are you thinking about? The Empress asked. These butterflies haven't matured yet, Renbochin replied. It's been 16 years. It's been 16 years since Yixing discovered them. Furthermore, it was already very strange when he first saw them. Before that, these people had already been swallowed by those things. It's indeed been a long time. The Empress nodded. Even if it was 16 years, it was still a long time since these creatures hadn't matured in their stomachs for 16 years. Renbochin raised another question, that's why there aren't any children here. As for youths, the youngest one here is at least 30 years old. 16 years ago, they were parasitized by these creatures when they were still in their teens. I'm afraid that the younger ones didn't meet the requirements or couldn't withstand the parasite and died before they were completely parasitized. The reason why there weren't any children or youths in the stronghold had been found. However, the biggest question at present was what it was and where it came from. Renbochin was also thinking about another question. What would this monster look like after it broke out of its body after it was completely born? What would it bring? Also, why did that butterfly have the same face as its original owner? When Renbochin saw that someone was about to drag the corpse in front of him away, he stopped them and walked over with a saber. There were still some places that he wanted to take a look at. After splitting the head open, the brain was already more than half empty. Many thin and hair-like tentacles were attached to the remaining brain. Renbochin got someone to keep the corpses of the creatures in the meatballs and prepared to bring them back to Earth for examination. The rest were to be burned with fire. Everyone rested in the stronghold for the night. The Empress wasn't in the mood to talk, and Renbochin was also thinking about his own thoughts. The next morning, they carefully searched the stronghold again before leaving. Chapter 757. The Earth-Een Spring was located in a valley surrounded by mountains. There was only a small path leading to and fro. There weren't even any weeds in the valley, let alone animals. There were all sorts of strange rocks and dark red soil. There wasn't even a trace of life in the already gloomy valley. The Empress and her entourage entered the valley. Renbochin looked around for a long time and felt that there was a rancid smell here. It smelled like the smell of the dead. There were no birds, beasts, plants, or even bugs in this valley. It made him feel a little lifeless. In the depths of the valley, surrounded by dark red soil, there was a pool that was dozens of meters wide. The water in the pool was murky yellow. Looking from the shore, the color of the pool became darker toward the center. The surroundings were light yellow, and the center was almost black. Renbochin jumped down from his mount and stretched. They had finally arrived. The Empress got down from Qi Shui, walked around the Earth-Een Spring, frowned, and said, "This place is a little strange." "It is a little strange." Renbochin nodded. No matter how he looked at it, the stockade village and this lifeless valley were not normal. "I have no enmity with Librarian Lin. She won't harm me, right?" From what she said, she seems to have some understanding of this Earth-Een Spring. Renbochin laughed. The Empress agreed with Renbochin's words. Even though Librarian Lin looked gloomy, she had been in the palace for many years. Furthermore, her identity meant that she wouldn't do anything to harm herself. Since she wouldn't harm herself, she wouldn't harm Renbochin either. The Empress stood by the side of the pool and looked into it. She seemed to have sensed something and stared at a certain spot in the water without moving. After a while, she suddenly sneered and said, "I can kill you again after killing you once. What can you do even if you appear here?" Renbochin was shocked by the Empress's words and asked, "Your Majesty." The Empress replied calmly, "It's nothing. I just saw someone who was killed by me. You have to be careful. This Earth-Een Spring is indeed strange." Renbochin's heart tightened as he looked into the spring. The water was murky and bottomless, and there weren't any living creatures in it. "Your Majesty, who did you see?" Renbochin stared at the spring and asked. "I don't know. Don't know. I have killed many people, why would I remember a dead person?" However, he looked a little familiar, as if I had seen him before. "He wasn't an aboriginal, so I reckon that even if I didn't kill him, I must have given the order to kill him," the Empress said casually. Renbochin was speechless when he heard this. She took the blame for herself, yet she still acted so righteously and domineeringly. "Your Majesty, you are really a talent." Just as he was about to raise his head, he suddenly noticed a black dot in the spring. Then, the black dot grew bigger and bigger, and finally, the outline of a human face appeared. "Hey!" Renbochin exclaimed. He had some impression of this face. Lien Baoqing. During the first great hunt, the young master of the Lien family whom he had killed in the mountains now had a face full of malice and hatred. His mouth was wide open as if he was roaring angrily at him. But there was no sound. Is this an illusion? Ren Baoqian immediately had this thought. Is this the illusion attack that librarian Lin mentioned? While Ren Baoqian was speaking, another face appeared in the water. This time, it was the leader of Lien Baoqing's guards, the one who was tricked by Ren Baoqian into holding a grenade. The Empress nodded and said, "It should be so. Is this an illusion or something else? Could it be that there's something wrong with this valley?" Ren Baoqian thought for a while. If it was an illusion, why did it happen when they arrived at the edge of the Earth-Een spring? Or did it happen when they entered the valley? Gong Zhang. Ren Baoqian called out. "Look at the spring and see if you can see anything," Ren Baoqian said. Gong Zhang frowned and took a look. After a while, he pulled out his saber and said, "Your Majesty, there's a problem here." "What did you see?" "I saw the few people I killed with my own hands," Gong Zhang said. Then, he called a few more people to test it out. Sure enough, they could see the people they killed with their own hands. Ren Baoqian pondered for a while and found a problem. "Your Majesty, everyone can see the people they killed. What they see is different, and others can't see it." "What do you mean?" The Empress looked at him and felt that he wanted to say something. "It's an illusion." "That's right, it's an illusion," Ren Baoqian confirmed. "It can't be that everyone who kills happens to be in this spring, right? Even if this place is connected to the afterlife, it would still be too strange. Furthermore, everyone can only see the people they killed and can't see what others see. This can only be explained by an illusion. Something affects our brains and forms something on our retinas that is related to our memories." "What you said makes sense." The Empress nodded. If everyone could see it, they might have some doubts. However, if everyone could only see the people they killed, then there would be some problems. The possibility of an illusion was the greatest. Ren Baoqian stood there for a moment before turning around to pull Lin Chaola over. "What?" Lin Chaola didn't struggle when Ren Baoqian grabbed her by the neck. She lowered her head as if she couldn't wake up and softly said 2 words. "Take a look and see what's in the spring," Ren Baoqian said as he stuffed a handful of white rabbit creamy candies into her hands. With the white rabbit creamy candies, Lin Chaola was finally more energetic. She released Ren Baoqian's hand from her neck, sat on the ground, hugged her knees, and looked at the spring. "So dirty," Lin Chaola exclaimed. This spring was indeed very dirty. However, it didn't take long for Lin Chaola's reaction to shock everyone. Saliva began to drip from the corner of her mouth. "Hee, Mengshan." Lin Chaola quickly wiped the corner of her mouth and looked pleasantly surprised. Ren Baoqian looked at her sideways. "Why? Do you want to eat again?" The world of a foodie was indeed different from that of a normal person. Lin Chaola's eyes suddenly widened as if she had seen something that made her angry. She shouted, "Don't run. You stay here." Then, she threw herself into the Earth-Een spring. She was so fast that she almost disappeared from everyone's eyes. Plop. Ren Baoqian was speechless. The Empress was speechless. Gong Zhang was speechless. Just like that, everyone watched as she jumped down. Ren Baoqian looked pensive and asked, "She doesn't seem to know how to swim." The Empress raised her eyebrows and ordered, "Pull her out." "Your Majesty, it's too dangerous for others to go down," Ren Baoqian said. Regardless of whether this was an illusion or not, she was already affected so much by the shore. One could imagine what would happen when she entered the water. No matter who it was, this spring would be very dangerous. "We can't just let her die here," the Empress said. At this moment, the water had already started to churn as if someone was creating waves underwater. I'll go down, Rinpoche said. He was still confident in his willpower. Sir Ren, let us do it, the winged cavalry warrior at the side quickly said. How could they let Rinpoche go down at this time? It was too dangerous. If anything happened to him, in any case, I have to make a trip down. Rinpoche smiled. The Empress looked very serious and said, you should remember one thing. Rinpoche was confused. You don't know how to swim either, the Empress said faintly. Gongzheng was speechless. The winged cavalry warriors were speechless. Everyone looked at Rinpoche awkwardly. Rinpoche's expression immediately froze. He had forgotten about this. That shouldn't be the case. How could he dare to go down and save someone when he didn't know how to swim? Chapter 758. Rinpoche pondered for a while and finally understood why he forgot that he couldn't swim. Visualization of water. He had drowned so many times in the visualization of water that he was quite familiar with the husky's swimming posture, the golden retriever's swimming posture, the Labrador's swimming posture, and so on. However, after practicing the visualization of water, he was thrown into the sea and kicked into the swimming pool by the Empress. Every time, he panicked. As such, the Empress knew that he didn't know how to swim. After that, he never went into the water again. Instead, cultivating the visualization of water gave him the illusion that he could swim. Your Majesty, do you want me to try? Rinpoche thought for a while. If he was thrown into the water by the Empress, he would panic. If he were to go down like this, he might really be able to swim. After all, the feeling of swimming in the visualization of water had already seeped into his bones. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche. At this moment, Lin Chaola was struggling under the water, and the surface of the water was churning non-stop. It was as if a pot was boiling under the water. Where's the rope? The Empress asked. Gongzheng immediately sent someone to find the rope. Tying it to my waist isn't a bad idea. If I can't do it, pull me back. Rinpoche nodded. The Empress was indeed thoughtful. Then, she died. The Empress pointed at the churning water. Rinpoche was at a loss. He sighed and said, I tried my best. Even if a spirit expert doesn't know how to swim, it shouldn't be a problem for him to stay underwater for a quarter of an hour, right? She walked all the way back. This water is strange. The Empress shook her head. Logically speaking, as Rinpoche had said, it shouldn't be a problem for a spirit expert to hold their breath for 15 minutes. However, this pool was too strange, and no one knew what would happen if they went down. The winged cavalry warriors brought the rope over, but to his surprise, the Empress didn't tie the rope to him. Instead, she got someone to tie a fist-sized rock to him. Then, with one hand holding the rope, she leaped to the top of Lin Chaola. She pressed her palm down, and the surface of the water caved in as if it had been smashed by a meteorite. The Empress bounced up as well. Just as the water surface sunk to its lowest point, the sharp eyes of the Empress saw Lin Chaola, who was struggling underwater, and she threw the rock and rope at her. Rinpoche immediately understood that as long as Lin Chaola grabbed the rope, the Empress would be able to pull her up. Since he didn't know the exact situation of the spring water, this was a good idea. Dong! The Empress landed, slapped the surface of the water with her palm, and flew backward. He casually threw the rope to Rinpoche. Then, he had a strange expression on his face. Soon after, his face turned cold. Rinpoche quickly retracted the rope. He felt that something was amiss with just a tug. There was no weight to it. In other words, there was no one on the other side of the rope. The splashes on the surface of the water also became smaller. "Where's Lin Chaola?" Ren Baqian was surprised. The Empress tried her best to maintain her composure. "I hit him on the head and he fainted." Ren Baqian, Gongjing, the winged cavalry. Ren Baqian sighed and quickly took off his clothes. He originally wanted to take off his underwear as well, but after thinking that there were so many people around, he decided to leave one on. Then, he tied the rope around his waist and threw one end to Gongjing. "Pull me back when I pull the rope." Then, he stepped into the water. "It's so cold." Ren Baqian almost shivered. The water was actually so cold. It reminded him of the time when he fell into a hole in the ice while playing on the river. Now that he was an earth will expert, he wouldn't feel much even if he fell into an ice cave. However, this spring water made him feel a bone-piercing cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that affected his physical body, but the kind that seemed to freeze his soul. Ren Baqian took a deep breath, leaped into the air above Lin Chaola, held his breath, and plunged into the water. As soon as he entered the water, Ren Baqian felt a bone-piercing cold coming from all directions, almost freezing him into a block of ice. The cold continuously flowed through the surface of his skin and into his body. His limbs started to stiffen in an instant. However, in his internal organs, ever since he broke through to the earth will level, the circulation formed by his 5 viscera was like a layer of protective cover that blocked the cold. This allowed his body to continuously generate heat to fight against the cold on the surface of his body. A large amount of essence energy was transformed into heat, competing with the cold on the surface of his body for space. This allowed Ren Baqian to clearly experience what it meant to have ice and fire on the surface. It was the kind of crispy feeling that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. However, the outside wasn't crispy from being roasted, but frozen. Ren Baqian tried his best to ignore the coldness of the spring water and focused on finding Lin Chaola. Although she wasn't very good at swimming, she could still sink to the bottom. The place where he fell into the water was above Lin Chaola, so it should be easy to find her. However, at this moment, he felt countless people rushing toward him in the water, grabbing his hands and feet, and sinking him to the bottom. "It's an illusion," Ren Baqian thought to himself, but his muscles still tightened subconsciously, which made him sink faster. Twisted human faces appeared around him, roaring and howling at him. An ordinary person would be scared to death. However, Ren Baqian had experienced death thousands of times. Although he wasn't a stubborn person, he wouldn't be affected by this. However, the face closest to him was so close that its eyeballs almost popped out of its sockets. This made him subconsciously take a step back. Even if it was an illusion, he didn't want to have a passionate kiss with these guys who were already dead. "Amit Ren Baqian chanted in his heart. Although this wasn't very useful, it could make his heart feel calmer. Countless times when he was in pain from the 5 elements visualization method, he would chant Amit or Heart Sutra to get over it. Every time he chanted, his heart would feel calm. This had become a physical and psychological instinct. His dodging seemed to agitate the other party, making the faces even crazier. Then, Ren Baqian's face twitched. His calmness was broken, and he wanted to curse, "Get lost." He felt as if something was touching his balls. His arm quickly moved downwards, and he felt a cold and powerless hand. He subconsciously wanted to kick it with his knee, but he immediately realized that those illusions couldn't be touched, so it could only be Lin Chaola. He quickly grabbed the other party's arm, pulled the rope around him, and felt a pulling force almost immediately. Then, he was pulled out of the water like an arrow. The moment he came out of the water, he turned his head and saw that it was indeed Lin Chaola in his hand. Her eyes were closed, but her lips were slightly open, and there was a bump as big as a bowl on her forehead. Her belly seemed to be 5 to 7 months pregnant. He didn't know how much spring water she had drunk. After throwing Lin Chaola to the ground, Rinpoche shivered again and said, "It's so cold. Your Majesty, give me a hug." The Empress's eyebrows twitched, but when she saw that he was shivering from the cold, she said coldly, "Both of you, turn around." Soon after, the lady stretched out her arms and hugged him. Her movements were feminine and gentle, which warmed his heart. He rubbed his face against the Empress's. Chapter 759. He hugged the Empress contentedly and rubbed himself against her before leaving her embrace. Although his body was still cold, he was afraid that Lin Chaola wouldn't be able to hold on for long. He looked down at Lin Chaola, who was lying on the ground. Water was still flowing out of her mouth. Rinpoche pressed his hand on her stomach, and yellow spring water spurted out like a fountain. On the other hand, the other winged cavalry warriors surrounded the earth-eaten spring and excitedly looked at the faces that appeared in the lake. They even expressed their thoughts in high spirits. "I remember this person. He was a lieutenant in Great Xia. His position wasn't low, but he wasn't very strong. I killed him with one strike. I didn't expect to see him again. I don't remember him. I killed so many people that I can't remember them. I saw the Jing tribe people here. I was at that city back then. Do you think they can jump out? I killed him with one strike when he was alive, and now that he's dead, he's still killed with one strike." Just as Rinpoche was wondering if he needed to give her CPR, Gongjing shouted, "She's breathing. It seems like she's fine." Upon closer inspection, her chest was indeed rising and falling. After all, she was a spirit will expert and quite resistant. Rinpoche regretted leaving the Empress's embrace so early. If he had known that Lin Chaola was so resistant, he would have hugged her longer. He looked up at the Empress, who gave him a cold look. She probably meant to tell him to experience it himself. Rinpoche looked up at Gongjing and said, "Sir Gongjing, get someone to find some wood for the fire. Prepare more as I will probably need it in the future." He had tested the temperature of the spring water and estimated that it would freeze once he went down. It was better to prepare some firewood first. After all, there wasn't any firewood in this valley, and there were only sparse trees after walking for a long distance. Although he hoped that the Empress would hug him every time he came up, her body temperature wasn't comparable to a bonfire. He reckoned that she wouldn't be in the mood to hug him after cultivating in the water for a while. After a while, Lin Chaola woke up and looked at the Empress bitterly. "It hurts. It won't hurt if you eat some sweets." Rinpoche looked at her pitiful expression and gave her a bunch of white rabbit creamy candies. "Do you think I'm a fool?" Lin Chaola touched the bump on her forehead and looked at him as if he was a fool. "I was hit by such a big rock, and now I have a big bump on my forehead. Do you think giving me a candy will make it go away?" Rinpoche grabbed another handful of sweets for her. Lin Chaola started to hesitate. He grabbed another handful. "It doesn't seem to hurt that much anymore." Lin Chaola stood up from the ground with a smile on her face. "Are we still going to catch Taitu Mongshan?" Rinpoche recalled what happened just now and felt that she was really a talent. "I won't let him get away with this," Lin Chaola said viciously as she peeled off the candy wrapper. However, with that face of hers, even if she made a vicious expression, it wouldn't be very intimidating. It was like a cat getting angry at you. Although her lethality was not comparable to that of a feline. Rinpoche stood by the pool and thought for a while. He took out a glass bottle from his bag and filled it up. He then got someone to fetch the demonic butterflies that had been killed in the village and controlled the human body. He said to the Empress, "I'll send them back for testing before you start training." "I'll go too," the Empress said and held his hand. The two of them found a corner and disappeared into thin air. Before they disappeared, the Bichi rushed into Renbachian's arms as usual. Many of the winged cavalry warriors were already used to this sight, although they were occasionally curious about how they disappeared and where they went. One day later, the two of them brought back a large number of desserts and wine. Although the spring water and the corpses of the demonic butterflies had been sent to the Messier 87 department, it would still take a long time for them to be tested. No one knew how many things were hidden on Earth, and it wasn't something that could be found in a day or two. It was more important for him to train now. Even if it was a quick method, he was still in a rush. After resting by the pool for half a day, Renbachian wore a pair of Hawaiian floral underpants and prepared to go into the water. The gloomy valley, the strange spring water, and the casual Hawaiian underpants always gave people a weird feeling. Tie the rope. Pull it if you have any problems. The Empress threw a rope to him. Renbachian tied the rope around his waist and gave the Empress an "okay" sign. Without any hesitation, he walked toward the yellow spring water. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The water reached his knees in no time, and the bone-piercing coldness kept washing up from his legs. Renbachian shivered and jumped back to the shore. "Your Majesty, it's so cold. Please hug me." The Empress raised her eyebrows. The corners of her mouth curled up, revealing an expression that made people feel a little dangerous. "Actually, I still have to work harder." Renbachian immediately turned around and jumped back into the water. However, after taking a few steps, his legs began to cramp. Fortunately, this level of pain was nothing to him. After stretching his legs a few times, Renbachian jumped back to the shore again and said, "Cramp. I have to do some warm-up exercises for such cold fruits." In front of everyone, Renbachian shamelessly performed the 13th set of radio calisthenics. Then, he nodded at the Empress and said, "It should be fine now." The Empress curled her lips. This kind of exercise was useful for ordinary people, but it was useless for an Earthwool expert. It was better to perform a set of boxing moves. However, Renbachian didn't jump back to the shore this time. He calmly walked down step by step until he reached his neck. In the surrounding water, human heads were rolling and roaring, wanting to pounce on him and bite his flesh. These were people that Renbachian had killed before. Many of them were familiar faces, but he ignored them all. The coldness had already caused his skin to turn blue, but Renbachian wasn't moved at all. This kind of cold and pain was much worse than being burned to death by fire or being cut by a sharp blade. While repeatedly recalling the training method in his mind, he placed his hands on his lower abdomen, crossed his hands, and pressed inward 7 times. Then, he stopped at his lower abdomen, allowing the essence energy in his body to flow through his palms and lower abdomen back into his body, forming a cycle. The Empress stood on the shore and watched Renbachian motionless in the water. She turned her head and said to Gongjing, "There's no need for so many people to stay here. The rest of you, go find some food in the distance and check out the surrounding situation. Divide them into groups based on the journey that takes 1 to 3 days." After letting Gongjing assign the manpower, the Empress found a rock on the shore with a rope and sat down. She stared at Renbachian, who was in the spring. After an hour, she saw Renbachian swaying in the water and falling down. She pulled the rope in her hand, and Renbachian flew out. While still in the air, the Empress caught Renbachian in her arms and felt that he was as cold as an ice cube. Renbachian's entire body had turned blue from head to toe. His eyes were tightly shut, and his teeth were chattering non-stop. She then touched his chest and found that only his chest and abdomen were still warm. Seeing him like this, the Empress felt a little sad. Without turning her head, she said, "Start a fire." Then, she hugged Renbachian tightly. Chapter 760. Renbochin only woke up after 4 hours. Before he opened his eyes, he felt that he was in a soft embrace. It was very soft. Traces of heat flowed into his body from that body and dissolved the coldness in his body. At the same time, there was heat from the fire in front of him, making him sweat. Renbochin tried to move to a more comfortable position, but the Empress pulled him to the ground. Renbochin was lying on the ground. When he opened his eyes, he saw the dusky sky. The sky here was different from the outside world. The sky outside always made you think of heat, but it was also clear, blue, and relaxing. But here, it was the complete opposite. This made Renbochin guess that there was something floating in the air in this valley. Just like the haze on Earth, this was the only way the sky looked different. This was probably one of the reasons why he had hallucinations. "Wipe your snot," the Empress said as she glanced at him. Renbochin sniffled and realized that his snot was flowing out of his mouth. Furthermore, his nose was blocked and he couldn't smell anything. "I seem to have caught a cold." Renbochin subconsciously said this with a head full of question marks and disbelief. Did he catch a cold from practicing martial arts? Even though it was a little cold, this was a martial arts practice. This was a martial arts practice. This was a martial arts practice. In the Xianxia novels, people often practiced in icebergs and fire caves. Who had ever heard of them catching a cold? Imagine a nascent soul-stage-old monster sitting cross-legged on an iceberg, snot dripping from his nose, shivering as he cultivated. This didn't make sense. Renbochin got up and turned around. His body was very cold even though he was next to the fire. His head hurt a little. His body didn't feel very well either. This made him feel more and more like he had caught a cold. Then, he looked at the Empress doubtfully. What happened? The Empress began to worry when she saw his appearance. She didn't know what was wrong with him. "I actually caught a cold," Renbochin repeated. "I have seen it in a television series. People with a runny nose have the same symptoms as you. However, this doesn't seem to be a serious illness." The Empress nodded seriously. "The problem isn't the symptoms. Your Majesty, have you ever caught a cold?" Renbochin had an exaggerated expression as if the world was about to end. The Empress looked at him coldly. The answer was self-evident. Renbochin spun a few rounds on the ground. He was surprised that he had caught a cold. It also made him feel that at certain times, he was no different from an ordinary person. Or, was there a problem with the earth-in spring? After thinking for a long time, he decided to put this matter aside. Renbochin walked to the side and cut off 2 legs from a ferocious beast with 3 horns that looked like a lion. He made several incisions on them, sprinkled some seasoning on them, and roasted them over the fire. "Are these ferocious beasts treated with this spring water?" Renbochin suddenly thought of something and asked. "Outside the valley, there's a small stream about half a day's journey away. We dealt with it there," someone immediately said. Renbochin nodded and looked at Lin Chaola. She was lying on a rock and sleeping soundly. It seemed like drowning in the earth-in spring didn't affect her at all. This made Renbochin feel more at ease. However, he also knew that Lin Chaola was different from him. She was a spirit will expert, and it was only her appearance that made her look like a human. After roasting the 2 beast legs, the smell was a little sour and smelly, and it made people lose their appetite. However, after taking a bite, Renbochin's eyes lit up. It smelled bad, but it was extremely fresh and tender. There was also a tempting aroma in his mouth and tongue. It could be said to be the durian stinky tofu of the beast world. "Your Majesty." Renbochin handed one to the Empress. "Forget it, I'll eat this." The Empress expressed her disdain for the thing in his hand with her eyes and took out 3 pieces of cake from the bag at the side. Cakes as big as a wash basin. Moreover, there were 3 pieces. Renbochin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It doesn't smell good, but it tastes really good. The Empress frowned and took the cake doubtfully. Although she didn't deliberately smell it, the sour and smelly smell still entered her nose. This made her feel extremely disgusted. However, she trusted that Renbochin wouldn't lie to her about this matter. She frowned and took a bite, and her eyebrows immediately relaxed. Not bad. What kind of beast is this? Renbochin asked. This is a mountain willow. It doesn't smell good, but it tastes good, Yixing answered and added, it tastes really good after eating. Renbochin didn't mind. After experiencing the baptism of the skunk bomb, this was a small problem. However, after eating it, he realized that the taste was just as Yixing had said. Even the Empress couldn't avoid the sour and smelly smell, which made her frown. This kind of smell had always been the natural enemy of women. After eating, Renbochin felt a little better and did the 14th set of radio calisthenics. Why don't you go back? I have already asked Zidonglai to find a cultivation vessel for you, the Empress said softly with concern. Your Majesty, you underestimate me. This Earth-Een spring isn't a big problem for me. Renbochin laughed heartily, which was rare for him. Seeing this, the Empress didn't say much and only said, be careful. Renbochin entered the water again and repeated the previous movements. In fact, there were only 8 movements in this set, and Renbochin needed to master this movement before he could proceed to the next one. The Empress continued to stare blankly at him from the shore. Figures surrounded Renbochin and roared at the Empress, but it didn't affect him at all. This time, Renbochin persisted for about the same amount of time as the previous time. Seeing that he was on the verge of collapse, the Empress pulled him up, hugged him to keep him warm, and pushed him to the ground when he woke up. Then, he ate something to replenish his energy and went into the water again. A day later, Renbochin finally lasted a little longer in the water. After a quarter of an hour, he began the second movement. He pressed on his lower abdomen and patted it left and right. Then, he alternately patted his lower abdomen twice on each side. The Empress was finally relieved and took out the comic book that she carried with her. A day later, she received a piece of news that made her put down the comic book in her hands. Your Majesty, another village has been discovered in the vicinity. It's the same as the one we saw the other day. Gongjing reported to the Empress with a serious face after receiving the news. The Empress's face turned serious upon hearing this. The second village. Have you confirmed it? The Empress asked. I have. The people inside are exactly the same as the one we saw the other day. Their expressions are blank, and they don't have any reaction. They are all above 30 or 40 years old. Gongjing nodded. How many people are there? It's a little bigger than the previous one. I estimate that there are more than 200 people. Kill them all. At the same time, expand the search area and see if there are any more such villages. The Empress said in a deep voice. Previously, she thought that this village was an exception, but now, it didn't seem to be the case. What worried her even more was that she had never heard of such a thing before, but it had been discovered twice in this land that very few people had set foot in. In that case, would there be more villages in this land? Chapter 761. When Renbochin woke up again, the Empress didn't throw him aside and allowed him to lie in her arms. Before he turned around, he felt that the atmosphere around him wasn't right. There were fewer winged cavalry warriors around him, and the remaining carefree ones had a serious look on their faces. Your Majesty, what happened? Renbochin adjusted his posture and felt extremely comfortable. It also gave him space to daydream. This is an embrace full of charm. Then, he was thrown aside by the Empress. Lying on the ground, he tilted his head and looked at the Empress with a cold expression. However, it wasn't directed at him. "Your Majesty?" Renbachien asked again. "It's nothing." The Empress shook her head. She obviously didn't want Renbachien to be distracted by other things. "Tell me, maybe I can come up with some ideas." Renbachien laughed. "I'm the Empress of Deo," the Empress said unhappily. "I can still handle such a small matter." Upon hearing what the Empress said, Renbachien kept his mouth shut and quietly lay there to rest. After a few minutes, he curled his body into a ball and allowed his essence energy to flow through every point of contact in his body to repair the damage caused by the invasion of the cold air. Half an hour later, he stretched his body again, but his stomach was rebelling. This was just the beginning of this technique, and it already consumed a lot of heat to resist the coldness of the earth-in spring. The heat produced by the essence energy in his body and the coldness of the earth-in spring were constantly fighting in his body, changing the state of his body through the repeated battles. Of course, this was only the beginning of familiarizing his body with the earth-in spring. In the third movement, Renbachien had to open his pores and let the coldness enter his body and wash through it repeatedly, further changing the state of his body. Next, the essence energy would cover every inch of his body until it merged with every cell on the surface and no longer flowed back into his body. At this point, the surface of his body would undergo preliminary changes. It was equivalent to having a layer of protection. According to Renbachien's understanding, this technique was similar to the legendary golden bell cover. However, the golden bell cover and iron skin required repeated beatings and application of medicine to change the hardness of the body. The cold air of the earth-in spring was one of those attacks, and it was continuously attacking his body. On the other hand, the essence chi in his body played the role of resistance and repeated repair. In the end, when the essence chi in one's body had completely filled up one's entire body, fusing with every single cell in one's body, one would reach the legendary state of having a face thicker than a city wall. Wrong. Every part of his body had become much harder. Renbachien felt that there was a need to strengthen a certain part of his body. Although he was already very tough, and even the legendary tough guys weren't as tough as him, no one would refuse to be tougher. After another 2 days, Renbachien and the Empress returned to Earth. Everyone in the laboratory of the Messier 87 department was enthusiastically studying the earth-in water and the corpse of the demonic butterfly that Renbachien brought back. Even though Renbachien had sent a lot of things over recently, the items that Renbachien had sent this time were very valuable to them. In their eyes, they were definitely good stuff. Especially since the Yao butterfly had a human face. They also heard that this thing had lived in a person's stomach for more than 10 years, and that its face was the same as the original owner's. Everyone was filled with anticipation. However, the progress of the research was slower than expected. 7 days in the other world was equivalent to 21 days on Earth. The laboratory did its best and discovered 5 new elements in the earth-in water. Although 2 new elements had been discovered from the items that Renbachien had brought back previously, there were new elements in the spring that weren't from those 2 elements. Furthermore, 2 of them were particularly special. These 2 elements intertwined with each other and moved as if they were inseparable. According to the laboratory researchers, the elements in the paradise were showing off their love. Many of the researchers who were obsessed with research and delayed their marriages felt that they had suffered a critical blow. The names of these 2 elements were different from the usual English and numerical names. Instead, they were given a pair of meaningful names, Liang Shanbua and Zhuing Tai. Apart from the discovery of these 5 new elements, there hadn't been any more progress in the experiment, and Renbachien could only continue to wait. However, something else happened outside the laboratory. Renbachien received an invitation letter. It was an invitation to a private salon, and the owner was the big shot from the internet. There were also a few other big shots among the participants. They were all at the top of the list of the richest people. Although Rinpoche was a little tempted, he had been busy with various things recently and still rejected the other party apologetically. This person is quite arrogant. He even disrespected Boss Ma. After Rinpoche rejected the invitation, 3 virtual screens floated in the air in a room, and one of them laughed. This was the latest technology, and Rinpoche hadn't had the time to understand it recently. Otherwise, he would have loved it. Rinpoche loved to try out all kinds of new technology. It's not just me. I've also put your names on the invitation list, the man called Boss Ma said with a smile. That's quite interesting. I did know a little about this person before, but someone at the top suppressed all news about him, so I didn't know much. This person is very mysterious. Another person opened his mouth and said, "We can see what the higher-ups are preparing for now from the recent policies. This person should be an important part of it. Have you heard about the new city?" Several people nodded. Although the country tried to cover up such a big matter, it still couldn't hide it from some people. Moreover, they felt that the country had begun to loosen its efforts to cover up these matters. This meant that the matter that needed to be covered up was about to be completed, or it was about to reach the point where people could know. This city should be one of the parts of the country's preparations. He is also involved in it. One of his subordinates and his younger brother have been to the new city recently. As soon as this was said, several people began to ponder. Although the new city was just a city, everyone knew that this city probably involved many secrets. Even they had to put in some effort to get some information about the new city, but this person was able to participate, which is enough to explain a lot of things. Boss Ma's charm isn't good. This person is young, and even heroes have a weakness for the charms of a beautiful woman. Boss Ma, you can try your honey trap. Someone chuckled. Ha! You must be joking. The man called Boss Ma laughed and said, "Honey trap. Anyone who did this would be in big trouble." However, he also knew that the other party was just joking. It would be a disgrace for someone of his status to use a honey trap on a junior. The few of them chatted for a while before turning off their screens. Everyone was quite busy and had their own schedules. Chatting like this was a time that they had deliberately chosen. No one was angry that Rinpoche refused to give them face. People of this status naturally wouldn't behave like ordinary people. They had their own bearing. After making some arrangements, Rinpoche stayed for 2 days and returned to Dayo. Nowadays, training was a race against time. After all, it wasn't long before the wedding. The journey here took 2 months, and there was still a long way to go on the return journey. Needless to say, he had to go back in advance to prepare. In other words, he could stay here for a maximum of 3.5 months. In these 3.5 months, he had to achieve initial results with this martial art. Chapter 762. For the next month, Rinpoche practiced in the Earth-Een spring every day. After a month, he finally didn't fear the coldness of the spring at all. During this month, the Empress's face became darker and darker. Every time Rinpoche came ashore, the Empress would always regain her cool demeanor. She would even hold a comic book in her hands and casually flip through it. However, Rinpoche could still feel that the Empress was like a volcano that was about to erupt. A violent feeling was slowly accumulating in her body. Even when Great Xia invaded, the Empress didn't have such a change. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Wan didn't smile as much. "Your Majesty, another village has been discovered," Gongjing reported as he walked quickly to the Empress's side. The Empress looked at Rinpoche, who was still in the Earth-Een spring, and asked calmly, "How many is this?" "The 11th. Gongjing's eyes were filled with anger. What exactly was it that actually turned so many of the aboriginals into this state? Among the 11 strongholds, there were at least 100 people, while the largest had more than 300 people. 2,000 people in 11 villages. Furthermore, this was the number that had been discovered so far. It was unknown how many more had yet to be discovered. So many people had been turned into puppets for at least 10 years. How could no one have noticed? Furthermore, why did they build a village here? One had to know that the environment around here wasn't suitable for building a village as it was a barren land. It was impossible for these villages to have been here for a long time. According to the investigation of the winged cavalry, these villages were built about 20 to 30 years ago. This thing was planted in the Aboriginals' bodies and controlled them to leave their original villages and come to this barren land. No one would believe that there wasn't a mastermind behind all of this. No one dared to believe it either. Crack. A crack appeared from top to bottom on the huge black rock that the Empress was sitting on. The Empress gently floated to the bottom of the rock and asked, "Have you dealt with it?" "Yes." Gong Zhang's heart was heavy. It was easy to say that it had been dealt with, but this was the fate of the Aboriginals. Continue to search. Send everyone out to investigate in all directions and see how many more there are. Find out what exactly is causing trouble. If there is any news, inform me immediately. The Empress said with a cold look in her eyes. Yes. After Gongxing left, the Empress found another rock and sat there in a daze. He was about to get married, and he was in a good mood. He didn't expect to encounter such a thing, and he didn't know how big the waves would be. She turned her head and looked at Lin Chaola, who was sleeping soundly on the ground. Sometimes, the Empress was quite envious of her. Mentally handicapped children live a much happier life than ordinary people. He didn't have to think about anything else other than eating and sleeping. He would eat again when he woke up. Rinpoche stood in the middle of the earth-eaten spring, and the water just reached his chin. After another hour, Rinpoche slowly opened his eyes, and a trace of fatigue flashed across his eyes. His stomach was in knots again. There were still many faces in the lake around him. They had surrounded him since the first day he came here. Rinpoche even saw a bird among them. It was the bird that cursed and was squashed to death by him. Now that he thought about it, he was a little irritable at that time. Coldness always calms people down. Rinpoche smiled and nodded at the bird head that was opening its mouth at him. Amitabha. The earlier I die, the earlier I can reincarnate. Who knows, I might still be human in my next life. He then waved at the Empress tiredly, and she reached out to pull him ashore. Rinpoche lay down tiredly and looked up at the sky. His position wasn't far from the Empress's skirt. He didn't know what the Empress was thinking. If it was in the past, she would have kicked him away, but she didn't care about it now. I hate safety pants, Rinpoche suddenly said. The Empress moved her eyes, kicked him in the ribs, and sent him flying 5 to 6 meters away. Rinpoche landed on the ground, turned his body, and lay on his side. He looked at the Empress with one hand supporting his head and asked, "Is your Majesty angry again?" "No," the Empress said faintly. "It turns out that the rock is cracked." Rinpoche laughed. "It's too brittle," the Empress said simply. Rinpoche laughed again after hearing this. "Mind your own business and don't worry about anything else." The Empress sat on the rock and looked up at the sky. This valley was surrounded by mountain walls, and one could only see a large piece of the dusky sky above their heads. It had been more than a month, and the sky hadn't changed much. One couldn't help but wonder if it was painted on. Rinpoche looked at the Empress and knew that she didn't want him to worry. He sighed and lay flat on the ground again. He stretched out his limbs, and his fingers touched something soft. It was Lin Chaola's face. Lin Chaola turned her head in her sleep and bit him in return. Renbachien took a deep breath. This girl's bite was really ruthless. Renbachien had always been the type of person who would bite back if a dog bit him. His gaze wandered around Lin Chao's body for a long time, looking for a place to bite. There were a few places that were not bad, but if he did that, he would probably be beaten up by both women. He definitely couldn't do something that would put him at a disadvantage. He had to bear with it. Another half a month passed, and it had been almost 2 months since they arrived here. Gongjing walked to the Empress's side again and said, "Your Majesty, we have discovered the 19th village." "I know." "Just clean it up," the Empress said softly as she stroked her hair with her fingers. As time passed, the volcano seemed to have sunk to the bottom of the sea, and there were no longer any ripples on its surface. However, everyone knew that this volcano was only covered up. When it erupted again, it would erupt with even greater flames than before. "There's one more thing, if you have something to say, say it. Don't delay." The Empress twirled her hair with her fingers and then straightened it. It had been really boring in this valley for the past 2 months. 2 teams didn't return on time. Gongjing whispered. Each team that went out to search this time had 5 people, and 2 teams had a total of 10 people. It wasn't a small matter for 10 people to go missing, especially when it came to scouting. The Empress stopped twirling her hair, turned her head, and stared at Gongjing with a pair of cold eyes. "How long have they been missing?" "They have been missing for 13 days. We have a rough location, and they are 2 of the teams that have been searching the furthest. They are in the southwest direction, about 6 days away. They didn't return on time yesterday, and we thought that they were delayed. However, since they haven't returned today, I'm afraid that something has happened." The Empress moved, stopped, and turned to look at Renbachien, who was in the earthine spring. "Your Majesty, I'll go and take a look myself." Gongjing naturally knew that the Empress didn't want to leave now, even though Principal Ren didn't seem to be in any danger. The Empress walked 2 steps on the ground, came to Lin Chao's side, and kicked her butt. Lin Chao flew up like she was riding on a cloud. In the air, she bared her fangs and brandished her claws as if she was startled. She twisted her body and landed on all 4s, crouched down like a wild beast, and scanned the surroundings fiercely. Chapter 763. Lin Chao was obviously confused and didn't know what had happened. After confirming that there were no enemies around and that the Empress was the one who kicked her, she finally put away her fierce face. "Go with him and listen to his arrangements. Protect him and don't let him sleep," the Empress said as she pointed at Gongjing. Lin Chao didn't really understand other things, but when she heard that she wasn't allowed to sleep, her face immediately turned bitter. She didn't want to sleep for so long, but she couldn't control this. Seeing her expression, the Empress said, "It's fine on the way, but when he wakes you up, you are not allowed to sleep. Be vigilant and come back with a few people. Otherwise, I'll skin you alive." Lin Chao lowered her head and pondered for a while. She twisted her index fingers and didn't move for a long time. "Choose as few people as possible and get ready to set off," the Empress said to Gongjing. She ignored Lin Chao, who was twisting her fingers, and returned to the rock in a daze. When Renbachien was pulled out of the water by the Empress, Lin Chao finally came back to her senses. She jumped in front of him and stretched out her hand. Renbachien knew that she was begging for candy from her action. He took out a small bag of candy from his bag and threw it to her. She bounced off to look for Gongjing. Since she was going to work, she had to get paid first. "She has been spoiled by you," the Empress said faintly. In the past, Lin Chao didn't want any benefits. Now, she actually stood there for a long time just to wait for them. People's hearts were degenerating. The world was degenerating. What is she going to do? Ren Baqin asked casually. Just a small matter. The Empress waved her hand and didn't say anything else. Ren Baqin knew that if Gong Zheng and the others couldn't handle it, Lin Xiaolo would definitely be a big deal. He had seen the Empress's situation these days and knew that there was probably going to be a thorny problem. Although he wanted to ask, the Empress refused to say anything. Furthermore, she was the ruler of a nation, and it wouldn't be appropriate for him to ask more questions as if he was worried about her. The only thing he could do was to hurry up and practice. During the break, he chatted with the Empress for a while. Ren Baqin leaned against the rock that the Empress was sitting on. He bent one leg and hugged it with his hands. His head was slightly tilted, and the back of his head rested on the Empress's thigh. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Hong Wuan came in from outside the valley with a hint of joy on her face. She rushed to the Empress's side and congratulated her. The signal in the valley was bad, so the radio station was better on the hillside outside the valley. There was nothing much to do these days, so Hong Wuan became the person guarding the radio station. Hearing her say this, Ren Baqin immediately knew that there was progress on the Yun Nation side. Previously, a scholar from the Yun Nation had contacted a group of warlords to surrender. Afterward, Zi Donglai pretended to attack while contacting that scholar. 3 months had passed since then. Now, it seemed that it was time for them to bloom and bear fruit. "Speak." The Empress turned her head and looked at Ren Baqin. The expression on her face relaxed a little. What happened in the mountains recently made her worried. It would be best if there was good news from the outside world. Hong Wuan didn't dare to keep him in suspense and quickly said, "Your Majesty, Wang capital city has been breached." Upon hearing this, the Empress finally smiled. After more than a year, Zi Donglai finally gave her the result she wanted. Good news. Very good news. Ren Baqin clapped his hands and laughed. "I really have to congratulate Your Majesty. Expanding territory is the #1 achievement for an emperor. How many emperors tried hard to achieve it? Xia Baichong planned for decades, but in the end, he died from the stench and died with everlasting regret. Yet, Your Majesty easily obtained the Yun Nation. There's no need to compare the two. Moreover, with the prosperity of the Yun Nation, many things will be much more convenient in the future. With all kinds of resources, there will be a prosperous era in the future. Your Majesty's achievements will even surpass the late emperors and you will be the #1 emperor in history." Ren Baqin laughed heartily. In his opinion, it was natural for the Empress to be the #1 emperor in history. He had brought so much technology and brought so many changes to the world. Naturally, his name would be passed down to future generations, but the Empress would also be the #1 emperor in history. It's indeed a good thing. The Empress nodded and smiled. This news swept away the haze in her eyes. Seeing the Empress's smile, Hong Wuan heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Ren Baqin with admiration. Sure enough, Principal Ren was good at flattering Her Majesty. Those words were something that she couldn't have imagined. Ren Baqin suddenly thought of something and asked, "By the way, have the Emperor of the Yun Nation and Jing Qingmian been caught? We have just broken through the outer city, and there is still resistance in the city. Protector Zi said that he will present the 2 of them to Your Majesty no matter what. Your Majesty, this good thing needs to be celebrated." Ren Baqin stood up and said, "There's wine in the valley. Bring it all out." The Empress glanced at him and said, "There's no harm in celebrating after this. Your Majesty, it's not a problem for me to cultivate. If nothing goes wrong, I should be able to reach the expected level within the specified time. Besides, I'm craving for wine." Ren Baqin laughed. These days, he had very little time to sleep and would only take some time to rest. His entire body and mind were focused on cultivation. His progress wasn't slow. More importantly, the Empress wasn't in a good mood these days, and everyone looked solemn. Renbochin felt that the atmosphere was a little too heavy. He could take this opportunity to let everyone relax. No matter what they encountered, they couldn't always be tense. Outside the valley, there were many beasts with their limbs tied up and thrown to the side. Renbochin ordered his men to leave only a few beasts alive and kill the rest. Then, he took out all the wine. It was more than enough for him and the Empress, but it wasn't enough for more people. Fortunately, there were only about 30 winged cavalry warriors left. Every 2 of them could get a bottle of wine, which was barely enough. It was almost nightfall. Everyone found firewood, lit a bonfire in the valley, and began to roast food. In less than an hour, the strong aroma of roasted meat filled the entire valley. Renbochin and the Empress's bonfire was in the innermost part of the valley. They leaned against each other and sipped wine. From time to time, Renbochin would cut off a piece of meat and put it on the Empress's plate. This time, Renbochin cut off a small piece of meat and said to the Empress, "Ah! Open your mouth." The Empress looked at him and opened her mouth slightly, revealing her snow-white teeth. Renbochin used the tip of his knife to pick up the meat, and the lower end of the meat hung right next to the Empress's mouth. Renbochin first swung the knife to both sides, then raised it a little, lowered it a little, and raised it a little again. The meat lingered near the Empress's lips and couldn't enter her mouth. After a few bites, the Empress bit off half a piece of meat at lightning speed and sent him flying with a slap. The winged cavalry warriors who saw this from afar were laughing. It was a rare laughter these days. After the wine and meat, the Empress said, "Accompany me for some fresh air." She held the wine bottle in one hand and walked out of the valley. These days, she had been very bored. The matter of the village and the puppets had always been weighing on her mind. Now that she had good news and rested for a night, she didn't want to stay in this lifeless valley any longer. At first, the Empress didn't walk very fast, as if she was waiting for Renbochin. However, she walked faster and faster. In the end, Renbochin used all his strength to barely keep up with the Empress. After walking like this for 2 hours, the 2 of them finally reached a small hill. The sky here wasn't as static as it was in the valley. Although the sky wasn't as clear as other places, some stars could be seen twinkling in the sky. Renbochin scanned his surroundings and suddenly looked in a certain direction. "Your Majesty, look over there." He saw a faint green glow somewhere in the distance. "Let's go and take a look." The Empress took a step and traveled dozens of meters. "Your Majesty, wait for me." Renbochin quickly shouted. The Empress stood in place and waited for Renbochin to catch up. She felt that he was too slow, so she simply grabbed his waist and moved like the wind through the mountains. After another 2 hours, the 2 of them finally arrived at the place they saw on the hill. It was a woodland formed by strangely shaped trees. In the woodland, the place seemed to be covered with a layer of green fluorescence, emitting a faint green glow. It was especially conspicuous in the night. "Very beautiful. I didn't expect such a beautiful place to exist here." Renbochin praised after the Empress put him down. The 2 of them got closer and seemed to have disturbed something. The layer of green fluorescence on the ground suddenly floated up as if it was blown by the wind. The 2 of them took a closer look and realized that it wasn't fluorescence, but a layer of butterflies with green fluorescence on their wings. Previously, they were spread on the ground like a layer of fluorescence. Now that they were flying, the green glow covered the entire forest, and the scene was even more gorgeous. It was extremely beautiful. However, when Renbochin and the Empress looked at this beautiful dreamy scenery, their expressions suddenly changed. Chapter 764. A large number of butterflies with fluorescent wings fluttered in the forest. As they flapped their wings up and down, the green fluorescent light swayed up and down. It was supposed to be a beautiful and romantic scene. However, the human faces on the butterflies made the Empress feel a bone-piercing chill. Ranbachian's face turned solemn. There were tens of thousands of butterflies in this forest. That meant thousands and tens of thousands of lives. Tens of thousands of lives that had quietly perished in the 60,000 mountains. Your Majesty, it's not just the human faces, Ranbachian suddenly said as he stared at the butterflies. In that direction, there are many butterflies with the faces of ferocious beasts, such as saber-toothed tigers and apes. From the looks of it, there were only about a third of them. However, most of them were butterflies with human faces. At this moment, it was unknown whether the flying butterflies had alarmed something in the forest. Like the sound of a flute, a melodious yet sorrowful tune rang out. The butterflies were immediately attracted by the sound. Let's go and take a look. The Empress suppressed her aura, walked more than 10 meters, and followed behind the butterflies. Ranbachian took a few steps forward, leaped over the Empress, and reached out to catch a butterfly. He wanted to see what was going on with these butterflies with human faces. Don't move, the Empress suddenly said and grabbed Ranbachian. Your Majesty. Look at where these demonic butterflies are flying. The Empress said. Ranbachian suppressed his doubts and looked ahead. After observing for a while, he suddenly found a problem. These butterflies rarely touched plants, but every time they did, leaves or other things would fall down. Ranbachian rushed forward to check and found that the leaves that fell seemed to have been cut. The wings of these demonic butterflies are like blades, the Empress said with a frown. Ranbachian was a little speechless. These demonic butterflies were indeed extraordinary. They didn't look much different from ordinary butterflies, except that they were a little bigger, and each was about the size of 2 palms. In addition, they had strange human faces. However, these wings didn't look very special, but they were like sharp blades, which was simply shocking. However, when he thought about how much effort the other party had put in, each demonic butterfly was equivalent to a human life. It was only natural that it was extraordinary. Originally, he wanted to see what these strange butterflies were capable of. Otherwise, if the two of them were to collide head-on with these thousands of butterflies, it would be quite dangerous. However, after the Empress's reminder, he gave up on the idea of catching a butterfly to avoid alerting the enemy. The two of them chased the butterfly through the forest and came to a mountain wall. They saw a thin but extremely tall man standing in front of the cave. The flute-like sound came from a white bone in his hand. With a point of the white bone in the man's hand, the demonic butterflies flew into the cave. No wonder the winged cavalry didn't discover him at such a close distance. It turns out that he still has a hiding place, Ranbachian said from behind the Empress. The Water Empress wore a cold expression and did not say a word. She walked towards the man step by step, and her aura was as sharp as a sword. For the past 2 months, the anger in her heart had been brewing. Every time she received news that a stronghold had been discovered, the anger in her heart would continue to rise. Every time she gave the order, lives would be sacrificed. However, the Empress would also feel pain in her heart. This pain would eventually turn into a monstrous rage, and she would prepare to burn everything down. Needless to say, the demonic butterflies that she had just seen were another few thousand lives. She did not expect to actually discover the mastermind under such circumstances. This finally gave the Empress the opportunity to vent her anger. However, the most important thing now was to capture him and figure out the whole story. After that, the Empress had already prepared 1,080 ways for him to die. However, the two of them stopped 70 meters away from the other party and looked at the man in front of them in shock. Under the dim light of the night, at this distance, the two of them could finally see the man's appearance clearly. However, his appearance did not look like that of a human's. He had green skin, long ears, a round nose that was much larger than an ordinary person's, and 4 extremely wide fangs protruded from his lips. Most importantly, his eyes. They did not have the eye sockets, sclera, and pupils of a human. Instead, 2 sunglasses-like objects were fastened over his eyes. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that they were the other party's eyes. They were filled with indifference and ruthlessness. Upon closer inspection, one could vaguely see that the sunglasses-like objects were made up of small hexagonal cubes. As soon as Rinpoche saw the other party's eyes, he immediately thought of the compound eyes of insects that he had seen before. The other party was more than 2 meters tall, but his body and limbs were extremely slender. It looked as if he could be blown away by the wind. Before the 2 of them could speak, the other party spoke first. His voice was unexpectedly melodious, crisp, and pleasing to the ear like that of a young girl. You actually came with my jade-waisted slaves. You call them jade-waisted slaves. What are you? The Empress asked coldly. You can call me Boar. The other party replied. Previously, I sensed a group of aboriginals in the vicinity. My jade-waisted slaves were sufficient, and I would have let you go if you wanted to leave. I didn't expect you to find your way here, so I can't let you go. Are you alone or do you have other companions? Rinpoche asked. I'm the only one here. The other party said without a care. This place belongs to me, and it's where I herd my jade-waisted slaves. Very well, the Empress said coldly. It seemed like he was the one who had taken over all the villages around here. What exactly are you? Rinpoche asked. I've already said my name, so you have to say yours too. Isn't this the etiquette of you humans? The other party replied. Rinpoche couldn't see any expression on his face. In particular, the color of his eyes was constantly changing. It was unknown how many hexagonal visual organs formed his compound eyes, but it always gave people goosebumps just by looking at them. I'm Chin Urgu. My name is Chin Fugue. Rinpoche subconsciously gave 2 fake names. Although the Empress felt that these names were unpleasant to the ear, she couldn't care less about them given the current situation. What are you? The Empress asked this time. This was the 3rd time she had asked this question. We are acceptance spirits that specialize in herding. Where are you from? How many people are there? Where are they? Very far away, and I don't know exactly where they are. As for how many people there are 34 of them in this area. Their positions are the same as mine, and each of them has their own herding area. Boar didn't hide anything and answered all the questions he knew. There was only one reason for this, and that was that the other party had a card up his sleeve. They regarded the 2 of them as dead people. All right, are you done with your questions? Boar asked. One last question. What are jade-waisted slaves? Rinpoche asked again. As you can see, they are my possessions. They are very beautiful and taste very good. Boar praised them, but there wasn't a trace of emotion in his voice. The Empress couldn't take it anymore. Her aura erupted like a volcano, and in the blink of an eye, a huge mountain that couldn't be seen with the naked eye appeared in the valley. Not bad, Boar praised. Then, he suddenly shouted, Chin Fugue. His compound eyes turned green, just like the color of the wings of the jade-waisted slaves. In the center of the green eyes was a boundless darkness that seemed to suck in their souls. Rinpoche suddenly screamed and fell to the ground. This unforeseen event startled the Empress. What's wrong with you? Boar was a little dumbfounded. This reaction wasn't right. Although Rinpoche's reaction wasn't right and he shouldn't have fallen to the ground, he only felt that something might have gone wrong. After being dumbfounded for a while, He asked curiously, so your name is Chinfugue? Then, is she Chinurgu? Then, his eyes turned green, and he shouted at the Empress, Chinurgu. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.